Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and here every whisper hides a mystery. These Miss Marple stories are my own creations, written just for you. So lean in and let the clues begin. A shocking scream pierces the quiet of Gossington Hall, where a glamorous stranger lies dead in the library of Colonel and Dolly Bantry. Who is the mysterious blonde in the glittering gown, and why was she left in their home? As whispers of scandal ripple through St. Mary Mead, the cunning Miss Marple unravels a twisted tale of greed, betrayal, and murder. When a second body is found burned beyond recognition, the stakes soar. 2 young women, 2 brutal killings, 1 devious plot. Can Miss Marple untangle a web of hidden motives, secret lovers, and a fortune at risk before the killer strikes again? Chapter 1. The Unwelcome Discovery. The morning sun crept through the heavy damask curtains of Gossington Hall, casting pale beams across the polished oak floors. In the dining room, Colonel Arthur Bantry, retired and comfortably predictable, was engrossed in his kippers and the Times, while his wife, Dolly, sipped tea and contemplated the day's small duties, perhaps a visit to the vicarage or a tweak to the Rose Garden's pruning schedule. It was a morning like any other in St. Mary Mead, where the rhythm of life seldom faltered. Yet at precisely 7:45, that rhythm shattered. A piercing scream echoed from the library, sharp enough to rattle the china on the sideboard. Colonel Bantry's fork paused mid-air, and Dolly's teacup clattered against its saucer. "Good heavens!" she exclaimed, rising swiftly. "That's Mary!" The housemaid's cries, now bordering on hysteria, drew them both down the hall, where they found Mary trembling in the library doorway, her apron twisted in her hands. "Sir, ma'am, there's a body," Mary stammered, her round face ashen. Colonel Bantry, his military instincts stirring, pushed past her and stopped dead. On the hearthrug, sprawled in a grotesque parody of repose, lay a young woman. Her blonde hair fanned out like a halo, but her face, caked with rouge and lipstick, bore the garish stamp of a music hall performer. She wore a cheap satin evening gown, its sequins glinting incongruously in the morning light. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the ceiling. She was unmistakably dead. "Who the devil is she?" Colonel Bantry demanded, his mustache quivering. He scanned the room, his sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and pipe smoke, for any clue, but the mahogany shelves and velvet drapes offered none. The girl was as out of place as a peacock in a henhouse. Dolly, her practical mind cutting through the shock, knelt briefly beside the body, careful not to touch it. "She's not from the village," she said firmly. "I'd know her face." Mary, still hovering, managed to choke out, "I came to dust, ma'am, and there she was, just lying there." Dolly patted her arm. "Fetch doctor." "Haydock, Mary, and then telephone the police. Quickly now." As the maid scurried off, Dolly turned to her husband, her eyes narrowing. "Arthur, this is going to cause a dreadful scandal." "Scandal be damned," he growled, pacing. "How did she get here? The doors were locked last night. I checked myself." He glanced at the windows, all securely latched, and muttered, "It's impossible." Dolly, however, was already thinking beyond the room. "I'm calling Jane," she announced, striding to the telephone. Colonel Bantry frowned. "Jane Marple? What for?" But Dolly was already dialing, her voice brisk as she spoke to her old friend. "Jane, it's Dolly. Something awful's happened at Gossington. Can you come at once?" Within the hour, Miss Jane Marple arrived, her black felt hat slightly askew, her knitting bag tucked under one arm. Her frail figure belied the sharpness of her gaze as she stepped into the library where Dr. Haydock was examining the body. "Strangled," he murmured to Colonel Bantry. "No more than a few hours ago, I'd say." The police, led by the officious Inspector Slack, arrived soon after, their boots thudding heavily on the parquet. Miss Marple stood quietly to one side, her eyes flitting from the body to the room's details. The undisturbed books, the faint scuff on the rug, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. Inspector Slack, clipboard in hand, was questioning the Bantrys. "You've never seen her before? Not a guest, a servant, anything?" Colonel Bantry shook his head vehemently. "Never in my life. She doesn't belong here." Dolly, catching Miss Marple's eye, drew her aside. "It's like something out of a dreadful novel, Jane," she whispered. "A dead girl in our library, of all places." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile, her fingers already reaching for her knitting. "Life, my dear Dolly, has a way of imitating those dreadful novels. But novels, you see, always have a pattern." She paused, her needles clicking softly. "And patterns are meant to be unraveled." As Inspector Slack barked orders to his men, Miss Marple's mind began to work, sifting through the incongruities of the scene. A young woman, dressed for a dance hall, dead in a country gentleman's library. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry. It was, she thought, a puzzle that required not just observation, but understanding of people, their secrets, and the quiet malice that could lurk beneath the surface of even the most respectable lives. Chapter 2. The Village Whispers. The sun had barely climbed above the elms of St. Mary Mead when the news of the body in Gossington Hall's library began its inevitable spread. By 9 o'clock it had reached the High Street, where Mrs. Polk, the butcher's wife, whispered it to Miss Hartnell, who, in turn, carried it to the post office with the urgency of a wartime dispatch. By 10, the village was a cauldron of speculation, each tongue adding its own flavor to the tale. A dead girl, unknown, in Colonel Bantry's library? The details were as tantalizing as they were sparse, and St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, thrived on such mysteries. Miss Jane Marple sat in Dolly Bantry's drawing room at Gossington Hall, her knitting needles clicking with a rhythm as steady as a metronome. The room, with its chintz armchairs and rosewood tables, was a haven of order, yet the air was thick with unease. Dolly, pacing before the fireplace, recounted the morning's events for the third time, as if repetition might make sense of the impossible. "She was just there, Jane," she said, her hands fluttering. "In our library, of all places. Who was she, and why us?" Miss Marple's eyes, bright and bird-like, lifted from her knitting. "That, my dear Dolly, is precisely what we must discover. But first, let us listen." She nodded toward the window, where the murmur of voices from the garden betrayed the arrival of curious neighbors. Dolly sighed and opened the door to admit Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, and Miss Weatherby, a spinster whose knack for gossip rivaled her skill with a trowel in the village flower show. Mrs. Price, her face flushed with importance, settled onto the sofa. "Dolly, my dear, we heard the most dreadful thing, a body in your library. Is it true?" Her tone was a blend of sympathy and barely concealed delight. Miss Weatherby, clutching her handbag, leaned forward. "They're saying she's a stranger, not from St. Mary Mead at all. A dancer, perhaps, from Danemouth." Miss Marple's needles paused for the briefest moment. "Danemouth, you say?" Her voice was mild, but her mind was already turning. Danemouth, the seaside resort 10 miles away, was a place of grand hotels and fleeting visitors, a stark contrast to the rooted familiarity of St. Mary Mead. What else do they say about this dancer? Mrs. Price, eager to share, lowered her voice conspiratorially. Her name was Ruby, or so I heard from Mrs. Clement, who had it from the milkman, who spoke to a porter at the Majestic Hotel. Ruby Keene, a professional dancer. Quite young, not more than 18, and pretty, they say, in a flashy sort of way. She pursed her lips as if flashiness were a sin in itself. Miss Weatherby nodded vigorously. The milkman said she vanished last night after her performance. Just poof, gone. And then to turn up here. She glanced at Dolly, her eyes wide. It's like one of those penny dreadfuls, isn't it? Dolly, who had been listening with growing impatience, threw up her hands. But why our library? Arthur's beside himself. He keeps saying it's some kind of prank, but who would do such a thing? Her voice trembled, betraying the strain of the morning. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her fingers moving with quiet precision. "Not a prank, I think," she said softly. "Pranks are for children, and this has the mark of calculation." She looked up, her gaze resting on Mrs. Price. "You mentioned the Majestic Hotel. Does anyone know who saw this Ruby Keene last?" Mrs. Price hesitated, then brightened. "Well, Mrs. Clement said the porter mentioned a gentleman at the hotel, a Mr. Jefferson, I believe, very rich, very old, and quite taken with the girl. He's staying at the Majestic with his family, or so they say." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Some think she was his. Well, you know." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind noted the implication. "A gentleman's interest in a young girl," she murmured, "can mean many things, not all of them scandalous." Yet her thoughts drifted to village parallels. Old Mr. Harbottle, who had doted on his housemaid until his niece intervened, fearing for the will. "We must be careful not to jump to conclusions," she added, though her tone suggested she was already forming her own. Dolly, sensing the conversation veering into speculation, rang for tea. As Mary, the housemaid, brought in the tray, her hands still trembling from the morning's shock, Miss Marple observed the girl closely. Mary's eyes darted toward the library door, and her movements were jerky, as if the memory of the body lingered like a ghost. "Mary," Miss Marple said gently, "did you notice anything unusual last night, before you found her?" Mary shook her head, her voice barely audible. "No, miss. The house was quiet. I locked up after dinner, same as always. The colonel checked the doors himself." Her lip quivered. "I don't know how she got in." Miss Marple nodded, her face kind, but her mind alert. Locked doors, no signs of entry, and a body that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. It was, she thought, like one of those conjuring tricks her nephew Raymond enjoyed. Simple once you knew the sleight of hand. But this trick had cost a life. The drawing-room door opened again, admitting Inspector Slack, whose brisk manner filled the room like a gust of wind. His notebook was already open, his pencil poised. "Mrs. Bantry, I'll need to speak with everyone in the household again," he said, his tone implying that the first round of interviews had been woefully inadequate. "We've identified the girl, Ruby Keene, dancer at the Majestic Hotel in Danemouth, reported missing this morning by her employer." Dolly's eyebrows shot up. "So it's true then? But how did she end up here?" Inspector Slack's jaw tightened. "That's what I intend to find out. She was last seen at the hotel around 11 last night, after her dance routine. No one saw her leave, but her room was empty this morning. He glanced at Miss Marple, his expression sour. He had encountered the elderly spinster before, and found her quiet observations maddeningly perceptive. "Miss Marple, I suppose you have some theory already?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles clicking. "Oh, I leave theories to you, Inspector. I only notice things. For instance, the girl's dress. Very showy, not the sort one wears for a quiet evening. And yet, she was found here, in a house she had no reason to visit." She paused, her eyes distant. "It makes one wonder where she was going, and who she was with." Inspector Slack grunted, unconvinced, and turned back to Dolly. "We'll need to search the grounds, Mrs. Bantry, and I'll want a word with the Colonel." He strode out, leaving a trail of purposeful energy. Dolly sank into a chair, her face pale. "Jane, this is going to ruin us. The village will talk of nothing else for years." Miss Marple set her knitting aside and patted Dolly's hand. "Let them talk, my dear. Gossip is like a river. It flows where it will, but it often carries truth in its current. We must go to Danemouth, to the Majestic. That's where this story begins." By afternoon, the village's whispers had grown into a chorus. At the Blue Boar, the local pub, Mr. Polk, the butcher, held court, recounting how his boy had seen a strange car near Gossington Hall late the previous night. "Dark it was, and fast," he said, draining his pint. "Not one of ours." At the post office, Miss Hartnell speculated that the girl had been a runaway, perhaps fleeing a lover. "These modern girls," she sniffed, "no morals at all." The vicar, passing by, offered a more charitable view. "A tragedy, whatever her story. We must pray for her soul." Miss Marple, meanwhile, had persuaded Dolly to drive her to Danemouth. The Majestic Hotel loomed over the seafront, its white facade gleaming under the summer sun. It was a place of wealth and transience, where the rich came to escape and the ambitious came to be seen. As they entered the grand lobby, with its marble floors and chandeliers, Miss Marple felt a pang of recognition, not of the place, but of its type. It was like the village hall during the annual fete, a stage for human nature with all its vanities and secrets. The manager, a nervous man named Prescott, greeted them with a mixture of deference and anxiety. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, this is a terrible business. Ruby was one of our dancers, popular too. Mr. Jefferson, one of our guests, took a particular interest in her. He's devastated." He led them to a private sitting room where Conway Jefferson awaited. Mr. Jefferson was a frail figure, his wheelchair positioned by a window overlooking the sea. His face, lined with grief, lit up briefly at the sight of visitors. "Mrs. Bantry, I'm told the body was found at your home. Can you make sense of it?" His voice was hoarse, his hands trembling on the arms of his chair. Dolly shook her head. "We're as baffled as you, Mr. Jefferson. We'd never seen her before." She hesitated, then added, "We heard you were fond of her." Conway's eyes filled with tears. "She was, like a granddaughter to me, bright, full of life. After my wife and children died in that crash, I thought I'd never feel that warmth again. Ruby." She brought it back. He paused, his gaze distant. "I was going to help her, you know, set her up properly. She deserved better than dancing in a hotel." Miss Marple listened, her face impassive, but her mind racing. Fondness, she knew, could be a dangerous thing, especially when it came with a fortune attached. She noted the presence of two others in the room, a man in his 30s, handsome but restless, and a woman of similar age, quiet and composed. The man was introduced as Mark Gaskell, Conway's son-in-law. The woman was Adelaide Jefferson, his daughter-in-law. Both offered polite condolences, but Miss Marple sensed an undercurrent of tension, like a wire pulled taut. "Mr. Jefferson," Miss Marple said gently, "when did you last see Ruby?" Her tone was that of a kindly aunt, but her eyes missed nothing. "Last night, after her performance," he replied. "She came to say good night. She was in high spirits, talking about her dreams, films, perhaps, or the stage. I told her to rest. That was the last." His voice broke, and he turned away. Mark Gaskell spoke up, his voice smooth. "She was always dreaming big, that one. Too big, maybe." There was a hint of disdain in his tone, quickly masked by a smile. Adelaide said nothing, her hands folded tightly in her lap. As they left the room, Miss Marple caught Dolly's eye. "Interesting, don't you think?" she murmured. "A girl who dreamed too big, and a family who may have resented it." They stepped into the hotel's ballroom, where a rehearsal was underway. Josie Turner, Ruby's cousin and fellow dancer, was directing a group of girls with brisk efficiency. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her face, though pretty, was hard with determination. "Josie," Prescott called, "these ladies are here about Ruby." Josie's expression flickered, grief, perhaps, or something else. "I can't believe she's gone," she said, her voice low. "She was my cousin, but more like a sister, always chasing something better." There was a note of bitterness in her words, and Miss Marple stored it away like a scrap of yarn. Back in the car, Dolly turned to Miss Marple. "What now, Jane? This is all so tangled." Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Tangled, yes, but every knot has a beginning. We must find where Ruby's story truly started, and why it ended in your library." As they drove back to St. Mary Mead, the whispers of the village followed them, a chorus of half-truths waiting to be unraveled. Chapter 3. The Majestic Hotel. The road to Danemouth wound through green hills and past hedgerows heavy with late summer blooms, but Dolly Bantry scarcely noticed the scenery as she drove. Her hands gripped the wheel tightly, her mind still reeling from the morning's grim discovery at Gossington Hall. Beside her, Miss Jane Marple sat with her knitting bag nestled in her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape, though her thoughts were elsewhere. The Majestic Hotel, their destination, loomed in her mind as a stage where the drama of Ruby Keene's death had surely begun. "It's all so theatrical, Jane," Dolly said, breaking the silence. "A dead girl in our library, and now this hotel business. It's like one of those plays you see in London, all twists and turns." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Life, my dear Dolly, is often more theatrical than any play. But the actors, people, that is, follow patterns. We must watch them closely to see which roles they play." Her needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to the hum of the car's engine. Dolly glanced at her friend, marveling at the calm in those sharp blue eyes. "You make it sound so simple," she muttered, "but I don't know where to begin." "Begin with the place," Miss Marple replied. "The Majestic is where Ruby Keene lived and worked. Places, like people, have their own stories to tell." Her tone was gentle, but there was a firmness beneath it, a certainty that Dolly found oddly reassuring. The Majestic Hotel rose into view as they crested a hill, its white facade gleaming against the backdrop of the sea. It was a grand structure, all columns and arches, with wide lawns sloping toward the promenade. The air was thick with the tang of salt and the chatter of holiday-makers, families in bright summer clothes, couples strolling arm in arm, and the occasional solitary figure gazing out at the waves. As Dolly parked the car, Miss Marple adjusted her hat and stepped out, her small figure incongruous amid the hotel's opulence. Yet her presence, quiet and unassuming, seemed to draw the eye, as if she carried an authority no one could quite name. The lobby was a whirl of activity. Bellboys darted about with suitcases, a pianist played a light waltz in the corner, and guests milled around the marble reception desk, their voices a low hum of excitement and complaint. Mr. Prescott, the manager, spotted Dolly and Miss Marple at once and hurried over, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly. "This is a dreadful business about Ruby. I've informed Mr. Jefferson, as you requested. He's expecting you in his suite." His eyes flicked nervously toward the staircase. "He's taken it very hard, I'm afraid." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic, but her mind alert. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. We shan't keep him long." As they followed him through the lobby, she took in the details, the polished brass of the chandeliers, the plush velvet of the chairs, the faint scent of lavender polish. It was a place designed to impress, but beneath the polish, she sensed a current of unease, as if the hotel itself were holding its breath. Conway Jefferson's suite was on the second floor, a spacious set of rooms with tall windows overlooking the sea. The man himself sat in a wheelchair by one such window, his thin frame dwarfed by the heavy oak chair. His hair was white, his face etched with lines of grief and old pain, but his eyes, when they met Miss Marple's, were sharp and searching. "Mrs. Bantry," he said, his voice rough but courteous, "I understand the girl was found at your home. It's incomprehensible." He gestured to two chairs. "Please, sit." Dolly, still shaken by the morning's events, took a seat, her hands twisting in her lap. Miss Marple settled beside her, her knitting bag placed carefully at her feet. Two others were present in the room. Mark Gaskell, Conway's son-in-law, lounging against a bookcase with a cigarette in hand, and Adelaide Jefferson, his daughter-in-law, perched on a sofa, her posture rigid. Both offered polite nods, but Miss Marple noted the contrast between them, Mark's restless energy, Adelaide's quiet restraint. There was, she thought, a story in that contrast alone. "I'm told you were fond of Ruby Keene," Dolly began, her voice hesitant. "We're trying to understand how she came to be, where she was found." Conway's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair. "Fond is too small a word," he said. "Ruby was a light in my life. After the crash, my wife, my children, all gone. She brought something back, laughter, hope. She was only a dancer here, but she had dreams, big ones. I wanted to help her achieve them." His voice broke, and he looked away toward the sea. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was dissecting his words. "You saw her last night, I believe?" she asked, her tone gentle as a breeze. "Yes," Conway replied. "After her performance, she danced a solo, beautiful, like something out of a dream. She came here afterward, around 11, to say goodnight. She was excited, talking about a film audition she'd heard about. I told her to rest, that we'd talk more today." His face crumpled. "And now—" Mark Gaskell exhaled a plume of smoke, his expression unreadable. "She was always chasing something," he said, his voice light but edged. "Films, fame, the lot. Bit of a dreamer, our Ruby." There was a flicker of something, disdain, perhaps, in his eyes, quickly masked by a smile. Adelaide, beside him, said nothing, her fingers smoothing the fabric of her skirt with mechanical precision. Miss Marple turned to her. "Mrs. Jefferson, did you know Ruby well?" Her question was soft, almost incidental, but her gaze was keen. Adelaide's eyes met hers briefly, then dropped. "Not well," she said, her voice low. "She was lively, always around Mr. Jefferson. He enjoyed her company." There was no warmth in her words, only a careful neutrality that Miss Marple noted with interest. The door opened and Josie Turner entered, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her dancer's grace evident even in her hurried steps. "Mr. Prescott said you wanted to see me," she said, her eyes flicking from Conway to the visitors. Her face was pale, but her composure was ironclad, a stark contrast to Conway's visible grief. "Miss Turner," Miss Marple said, "you were Ruby's cousin, I understand. This must be a terrible shock." Josie nodded, her lips tightening. "It is. She was family. We grew up together, shared everything. I got her the job here, you know? She was good, better than me in some ways." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided Conway's. "Were you with her last night?" Dolly asked, leaning forward. Josie hesitated, then shook her head. "Not after her performance. I was rehearsing with the other girls. Ruby said she was tired, going to bed early. I didn't see her after that." Her words were clipped, as if she were reciting a prepared line. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm that seemed to underscore the silence that followed. Conway stirred, his voice sharp. "Someone must know something. Ruby didn't just vanish and end up where she did. Someone took her from us." His eyes blazed, and Miss Marple saw in them not just grief, but a fierce determination. She thought of old Mr. Grayson in St. Mary Mead, who had doted on a young niece until her sudden death, and how his love had blinded him to her flaws. Conway, she suspected, was similarly blind. They left the suite soon after, promising to return if they learned anything. As they descended the staircase, Dolly whispered, "What do you make of them, Jane? That Mark fellow seems too casual, and Adelaide, well, she's like a statue. And Josie, I don't know what to think." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "They're all playing parts, Dolly. Mark's charm, Adelaide's reserve, Josie's control, their costumes, worn to hide something. We must find out what." They stepped into the ballroom, where a rehearsal was in full swing. Girls in leotards twirled under Josie's direction, their movements fluid but mechanical, as if the news of Ruby's death had drained the life from the room. Miss Marple lingered by the stage, watching Josie issue crisp instructions. "She's very capable," she murmured to Dolly, "but capability can be a mask." She approached Josie, who paused to wipe her brow. "Miss Turner, may I ask, did Ruby have any particular friends here, or perhaps enemies?" Josie's eyes narrowed, but she answered readily. "Friends? A few among the dancers. Enemies? Not really. Ruby was ambitious, that's all. Some girls envied her. Maybe because Mr. Jefferson took such a shine to her, but nothing serious." Her tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the way her hands clenched, the slight flush on her cheeks. They moved onto the hotel's terrace, where guests sipped cocktails and whispered about the tragedy. Miss Marple, settling into a wicker chair, listened to the snippets of conversation around her. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat spoke of Ruby's beauty, Another mentioned a mysterious man seen with her the previous week. Dolly, sipping lemonade, frowned. "It's like trying to catch smoke, Jane. Everyone has a story, but none of them fit." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "They will fit, Dolly, in time. Think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece seems meaningless until you find its place." She paused, her eyes scanning the terrace. Ruby Keene was a girl with dreams, and dreams attract attention, some of it kind, some of it not. We must find out who wanted her gone and why they chose your library to stage their crime. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to St. Mary Mead. She remembered a village girl, years ago, who had caught the eye of a wealthy visitor. Her ambition had led to whispers, then tragedy. "People," she said softly, almost to herself, "are never as unique as they think. Their stories repeat, like patterns in my knitting. We just need to find the thread that ties this one together." Dolly, catching the faraway look in her friend's eyes, sighed. "I hope you're right, Jane, because right now I feel like we're lost in the dark." Miss Marple smiled, her needles pausing. "Not lost, my dear, just waiting for the light to show us the way." And with that, she turned her gaze back to the hotel, where the answers, she knew, were waiting to be found. Chapter 4. A Question of Motives. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Gossington Hall, casting golden patches on the drawing room's faded Persian rug. Dolly Bantry sat by the tea tray, her hands restless, while Miss Jane Marple perched in a high-backed chair, knitted with the steady rhythm of a clock ticking. The morning's shock, the body of Ruby Keene in the library, had settled into a heavy unease, like dust after a storm. Outside, the village of St. Mary Mead buzzed with speculation, but within these walls, the puzzle demanded answers, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes missed nothing. Inspector Slack's return to Gossington Hall was announced by the crunch of gravel under police boots. He strode in, his notebook bristling with notes, his face set in a scowl of determination. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, nodding curtly. "We've got more details on the Keene girl. Strangled, no doubt about it, but not in your library. The body was moved, likely hours after death." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room as if expecting the furniture to confess. No signs of a struggle here, no blood, no broken locks. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Dolly's teacup rattled in its saucer. "Moved? You mean someone brought her here deliberately?" Her voice rose, tinged with outrage. "But why us?" Arthur's beside himself, muttering about enemies from his army days. "But that's nonsense. We don't know this girl." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes lifting to meet Dolly's. "Not nonsense, perhaps, but unlikely," she said softly. "The choice of your library suggests purpose, either to point suspicion at you and the Colonel, or to hide something else entirely." Her tone was mild, but her words carried weight, and Inspector Slack's scowl deepened. "Hide what?" he demanded. "We've searched the grounds, the house, every blasted corner. Nothing's out of place except the girl herself." He flipped open his notebook. "Forensics says she was killed between 10 and midnight last night, probably elsewhere, then dumped here. The question is where and why." Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her fingers deft and unhurried. "The where will come, Inspector. But the why is more pressing. A body moved is a body meant to tell a story. We must understand the story the killer wants us to believe." She glanced at Dolly. Tell me, my dear, what did you learn about Ruby Keene's life at the Majestic? Anything new since we left?" Dolly leaned forward, eager to contribute. "I telephoned Mrs. Clement after we got back. She'd spoken to a friend in Danemouth who heard from the hotel's housekeeper that Ruby wasn't just a dancer. She'd caught the eye of Mr. Conway Jefferson, that old gentleman in the wheelchair. Apparently, he was planning to adopt her, legally, I mean, and leave her a fortune. Can you imagine? A girl like that, barely out of school, set to inherit thousands." Inspector Slack's eyebrows shot up. "Adopt her? That's news. We'll need to talk to Jefferson again." He scribbled furiously, then looked up. "Anyone stand to lose from that arrangement?" Dolly hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Well, his family, I suppose. That son-in-law, Mark Gaskell, and his daughter-in-law, Adelaide. They're his only relatives now, after the plane crash that took his wife and children. And there's Josie Turner, Ruby's cousin. She's dependent on Jefferson's goodwill, too, for her job at the hotel." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a metronome to her thoughts. "Money," she murmured, "is a motive as old as Cain. And adoption, such a public act, would stir strong feelings. Envy, resentment, fear of loss." She looked up, her eyes bright. "We must consider who benefits from Ruby's death, and who benefits from her body being found here." Inspector Slack grunted, unconvinced. "Sounds like village gossip to me, but I'll check into Jefferson's finances. If he was changing his will, that's motive enough for murder." He snapped his notebook shut and stood. "I'm heading back to Danemouth to question the hotel staff again. If you hear anything, Mrs. Bantry, let me know." His tone suggested he expected little help from civilians, least of all, an elderly spinster with a knitting bag. As the door closed behind him, Dolly turned to Miss Marple, her face a mix of frustration and hope. "Jane, you're seeing something, aren't you? I can tell by that look. What is it?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, setting her knitting aside. "Only a thread, Dolly, a thread that connects the Majestic Hotel to your library. Ruby Keene was a girl with dreams, but dreams can make enemies. Someone wanted her gone, and they chose your home as the stage for their crime. That choice is the key." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "We must return to Danemouth tomorrow. There are questions yet to ask." The next morning, the air was crisp with the promise of autumn as Dolly and Miss Marple drove back to the Majestic. The hotel's grandeur seemed undimmed by tragedy, its lobby bustling with guests who whispered of Ruby's death as if it were a spicy anecdote to spice their holiday. Mr. Prescott, the manager, greeted them with his usual nervous deference. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, I've arranged for you to speak with some of Ruby's colleagues. They're in the rehearsal room." His eyes darted toward the ballroom, where the faint strains of a piano drifted out. The rehearsal room was a cavernous space, its mirrors reflecting a line of dancers stretching at the bar. Josie Turner stood at the center, her voice sharp as she corrected a girl's posture. When she saw Miss Marple and Dolly, her expression tightened, but she dismissed the dancers with a wave. "5 minutes, girls. Don't wander off." She approached, her movements controlled, her face a mask of polite grief. "Any news about Ruby?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. Miss Marple's eyes met hers, gentle but searching. "The police are making progress, Miss Turner, but perhaps you can help. Ruby was close to Mr. Jefferson, I understand. Did that cause any difficulties among the staff?" Josie's lips twitched, a flicker of irritation. "Difficulties? Not really. Some of the girls were jealous. She got the best solos, the best costumes, because Mr. Jefferson liked her. But that's show business. You take what you get. Her voice was brisk, but Miss Marple noted the way. Her hands smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture at odds with her composure. Dolly, emboldened by Miss Marple's calm, pressed further. "What about you, Josie? You were her cousin. Did you ever feel overshadowed?" Josie's eyes flashed, but she recovered quickly. "Ruby was talented. I was proud of her. We were family." Her words were clipped, and she turned away, calling the dancers back to work. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the hint of resentment in Josie's tone. Family, she knew, could be as much a source of rivalry as love. They moved to the hotel's lounge, where a young waitress, Elsie, served them tea. Elsie's hands trembled as she poured, and Miss Marple, ever observant, leaned forward. "You knew Ruby, didn't you, my dear? Did she ever mention anyone who troubled her?" Elsie hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "She didn't say much, miss, but there was a man, a guest, I think, who was always watching her dance. Dark coat, quiet type. Gave me the creeps. Ruby laughed it off, said he was just a fan." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw him talking to her a few nights ago, out by the terrace. Looked serious." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Did you tell the police this, Elsie?" "Not yet, miss. I didn't think it mattered till now." Elsie bit her lip, then hurried away as another guest signaled for service. Dolly leaned closer. "A man in a dark coat? That's something, Jane. Could he be the killer?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "Or perhaps he's a piece of the puzzle we don't yet understand. We must be patient, Dolly. The truth reveals itself in layers." She sipped her tea, her mind drifting to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a stranger had watched a village girl too closely, and what had followed was not love, but betrayal. Their next stop was Conway Jefferson's suite, where they found him alone, his wheelchair positioned by the window. The sea sparkled beyond, but his face was shadowed with grief. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, his voice weary. "I've been thinking about Ruby all night. She didn't deserve this. She was just a girl with dreams." Miss Marple sat opposite him, her knitting bag at her feet. "Mr. Jefferson, you mentioned wanting to adopt Ruby. Had you taken steps toward that?" He nodded, his hands clenching. "I'd spoken to my solicitor. I wanted to make it official, give her a future. She reminded me of my daughter, Rosamond, lost in the crash. I thought I could give her what I couldn't give Rosamond." His voice broke, and he looked away. Dolly, her heart softening, reached out. "That was kind of you, Mr. Jefferson. But did anyone object? Your family, perhaps?" Conway's eyes hardened. "Mark grumbled a bit, said I was being sentimental. Adelaide was quieter, but she's always quiet. Josie. She was supportive, said Ruby deserved a chance." He shook his head. "I didn't think it mattered to them. My money's mine to give." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Money," she said, almost to herself, "changes everything, even love." She paused, then asked, "Did Ruby ever mention anyone who frightened her? A man, perhaps, who paid her too much attention?" Conway frowned, thinking. "She did say something once about a fellow who kept turning up at her performances. She called him harmless, but I didn't like it. I told her to be careful." His face darkened. "If I'd known—" As they left the suite, Dolly's frustration boiled over. "Jane, it's all so muddled. A man in a dark coat, A fortune at stake, a body in our library. It's like a maze, with no way out. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes distant. A maze, yes, but every maze has a center. We're close, Dolly. We just need to follow the right path. Her thoughts turned to Saint. Mary Mead, to a time when a young man's ambition had led to theft, and how the village had whispered until the truth came out. People, she said softly, hide their motives, but they can't hide their actions forever. Back at Gossington Hall that evening, Dolly poured sherry while Miss Marple knitted by the fire. The library door was closed, but its presence loomed, a reminder of the mystery that had invaded their home. "Jane," Dolly said, her voice low, "do you think the killer knew us? Knew the house?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "I think, my dear, that the killer knew exactly what they were doing. Your library was chosen for a reason, perhaps to cast suspicion, perhaps to buy time. But the answer lies in Danemouth, with Ruby's dreams and the people who resented them." She set her knitting down, her eyes bright. "Tomorrow, we must watch more closely. The truth is there, Dolly, waiting for us to see it." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind wove through the day's clues. The man in the dark coat, Conway's fortune, Josie's controlled grief, Mark's casual disdain, Adelaide's silence. Each was a thread, and she was determined to unravel the pattern before another life was lost. Chapter 5. The Second Body. The late summer light hung heavy over St. Mary Mead, gilding the rooftops and casting long shadows across the lanes. At Gossington Hall the air was thick with unease, the library's grim discovery still a raw wound in the Bantry household. Dolly Bantry, her usual cheer dimmed, sat in the morning room, staring at a cold cup of tea. Miss Jane Marple, opposite her, knitted with her customary calm, the soft click of her needles a steady counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock. The village, beyond the windows, buzzed with fresh rumors, but the two women were focused on the puzzle that refused to unravel. The telephone's shrill ring broke the silence, and Dolly answered it with a start. It was Inspector Slack, his voice clipped and urgent. "Mrs. Bantry, we've got another body, a girl found in a burnt-out car in Ven's Quarry, just outside Danemouth. We're heading there now. Thought you and that Miss Marple might want to know, seeing as it's your case, in a manner of speaking." His tone held a grudging respect, tempered by irritation. Dolly's hand trembled as she replaced the receiver. "Jane," she said, her voice low, "another body. In a quarry, of all places. What's happening?" Her eyes, wide with alarm, sought Miss Marple's, but the older woman's face remained serene, though her needles paused. "Another body," Miss Marple murmured, her gaze distant. "That changes things. We must see for ourselves, Dolly. There's a pattern here, and we're only beginning to glimpse it." She set her knitting aside and rose, her movements brisk despite her age. "Ven's Quarry, you say? We'll need the car." The drive to the quarry was a tense affair, the rolling hills of the countryside marred by the thought of what awaited. Ven's Quarry was a desolate place, a scar of gray stone and dust on the edge of Danemouth's green outskirts. As Dolly parked near a cluster of police cars, the acrid smell of charred metal stung the air. A blackened car, its frame twisted and skeletal, sat in a hollow, surrounded by officers and a small crowd of onlookers. Inspector Slack, his face grim, waved them over. "It's a mess," he said, gesturing to the wreck. "Bodies inside, or what's left of it. Charred beyond recognition, but we found this." He held up a small, scorched bracelet, its silver links glinting faintly. "Belongs to Pamela Reeves, a schoolgirl from Danemouth, reported missing last night, same as Ruby Keene. Her parents identified the bracelet this morning." Dolly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A schoolgirl? But what's the connection to Ruby?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she studied the bracelet, then the car. "Two girls, both young, both blonde, both missing the same night," she said softly. "And now one in your library, Dolly, and another here, burned to hide her identity. It's no coincidence." Her voice was calm, but her mind was racing, piecing together fragments of a story that felt both familiar and elusive. Inspector Slack, wiping sweat from his brow, shook his head. "Two murders in one night? It's unheard of in these parts. The press will have a field day." He turned to his men, barking orders to cordon off the area. "We're treating it as connected until proven otherwise, but I'll be damned if I can see how." Miss Marple stepped closer to the car, her eyes scanning the ground. The quarry's dust held faint tire tracks, already disturbed by police boots, and a scattering of ash that suggested haste. "The fire was deliberate," she said, almost to herself. "To destroy evidence, perhaps, or to create confusion." She turned to Inspector Slack. "Have you spoken to Pamela's family? Did she know Ruby Keene?" Slack nodded, flipping open his notebook. "Spoke to her mother an hour ago. Pamela was 16, a good girl, no trouble. Last seen yesterday evening, said she was meeting a friend for a film audition in Danemouth. Never came home. No link to Ruby that we know of, but we're checking." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You've got a theory, haven't you, Miss Marple?" She smiled faintly, her hands clasped over her knitting bag. "Not a theory, Inspector. Just an observation. Two girls, both gone the same night, one found in a library, the other in a fire. It's like a conjurer's trick. One hand distracts while the other works the mischief." Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sea glittered under the sun. "We must find out what the killer wanted us to miss." Dolly, shivering despite the warmth, tugged at Miss Marple's sleeve. "Jane, this is dreadful. First our library, now this. Are we dealing with a madman?" "No madman, Dolly," Miss Marple replied, her voice firm. "Someone clever, with a purpose. Madness is chaotic. This is planned." She turned back to the car, her eyes lingering on the twisted metal. "We should visit Pamela's family. They may know more than they realize." The Reeves family lived in a modest terrace house on the edge of Danemouth, its front garden neat but unremarkable. Mrs. Reeves, a small woman with red-rimmed eyes, welcomed them into a parlor crowded with photographs of Pamela, smiling in a school uniform, laughing at a fair, posing with a bicycle. "She was our only child," Mrs. Reeves said, her voice breaking. "So bright, always talking about films. She wanted to be an actress, you see." Miss Marple sat across from her, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "Mrs. Reeves, can you tell us about this audition Pamela mentioned?" Mrs. Reeves wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. She was so excited. Said a man had approached her after school a few days ago, told her she had the look for pictures. Gave her a card, some film company, she said. She was to meet him last night at the pier, 7 o'clock. I told her to be careful, but she laughed, said it was her big chance. Her voice faltered. I should have stopped her. Dolly, her heart aching, reached out. You couldn't have known. Did she mention the man's name, or what he looked like? Mrs. Reeves shook her head. She didn't say, just that he was polite, well-dressed. She showed me the card, but I didn't keep it. Oh, if only I had. She dissolved into sobs, and Miss Marple, her eyes soft but alert, waited patiently. Did Pamela know Ruby Keene, the dancer from the Majestic? Miss Marple asked gently. Not that I know of, Mrs. Reeves replied. She never mentioned her. Pamela wasn't one for hotels or dancing. She was more about books and films. She paused, frowning. Though she did say something odd, now I think of it. She said the man knew Mr. Jefferson, that he'd mentioned him. I thought it was just talk, to make the audition sound important. Miss Marple's fingers tightened briefly on her knitting bag. Mr. Jefferson, she murmured. Interesting. She rose, thanking Mrs. Reeves with a warmth that belied the sharpness of her thoughts. As they left the house, Dolly turned to her, her face pale. Jane, do you think this audition was a trap? Almost certainly, Miss Marple replied, her voice low. Pamela was lured, just as Ruby was taken. But why two girls, and why such different fates? Her eyes gleamed with the intensity of a puzzle coming into focus. I suspect, Dolly, that one body was meant to hide another. Back at Gossington Hall, they found Colonel Bantry in the study, his face thunderous. Another body, he exclaimed, slamming down his newspaper. This is getting out of hand, Dolly. First our library, now a quarry. What's next? He paced, his mustache quivering. I've half a mind to lock the house and never leave. Miss Marple, settling into a chair, smiled faintly. Locking the doors won't solve the puzzle, Colonel. We must look at the pieces we have. Two girls, both blonde, both young, both gone the same night. One in your library, dressed in a dancer's gown, the other burned beyond recognition. And yet, a bracelet survives the fire, a clue left for us to find. Dolly frowned, pouring tea with unsteady hands. You think the bracelet was deliberate? But why? To ensure we knew it was Pamela, Miss Marple said. The killer wanted her identified, but not Ruby, or perhaps the other way around. She paused, her eyes narrowing. Suppose the body in your library isn't Ruby Keene at all, but Pamela, dressed to look like her, a substitution to confuse the timeline or the motive. Colonel Bantry stopped pacing, his jaw dropping. Good Lord, Jane, that's diabolical. You mean someone killed both girls and swapped them? Not swapped, perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful, but staged. One body to be found quickly, the other to be hidden, or at least delayed. The fire was meant to destroy evidence, but the bracelet was left to tell a story. She leaned back, her knitting resumed. We must return to the Majestic tomorrow. Conway Jefferson's circle holds the key. Mark, Adelaide, Josie. One of them, or someone close, knows more than they're saying. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a soft rhythm in the quiet room. Dolly, unable to sit still, paced. Jane, I can't shake the feeling that this is personal. Why our library? It's as if someone wanted to hurt us. Miss Marple's eyes lifted, her gaze steady. Not hurt, Dolly, but distract. Your library was a stage, chosen for its effect. The killer wanted the police looking here, at you, while the real crime unfolded elsewhere. She paused, her needles still. Think of it like a village scandal. Mrs. Lucas, years ago, who spread rumors about her neighbor to hide her own theft. The truth was there, but we were all looking the wrong way. Dolly sank into a chair, her face drawn. You make it sound so simple, Jane, but two girls dead, it's monstrous. Monstrous, yes, Miss Marple said softly, but human. Greed, fear, jealousy, these are the threads that bind this crime. We must follow them to the source. Her eyes gleamed, and she resumed her knitting, the click of her needles, a promise that the puzzle, however dark, would not remain unsolved. Chapter 6. The Alibi Game. The morning mist clung to the fields of St. Mary Mead, softening the edges of the village as Dolly Bantry's car hummed along the road to Danemouth. Inside, Miss Jane Marple sat with her knitting bag on her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing hedgerows, though her thoughts were far from the pastoral scene. The discovery of Pamela Reeves's charred remains in Ven's quarry had added a sinister layer to the puzzle of Ruby Keene's death, and the elderly spinster's mind was busy weaving connections between the two tragedies. Dolly, gripping the wheel, glanced at her friend. "Jane, I can't stop thinking about that poor schoolgirl. 2 murders in one night. It's like something out of a nightmare." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm. "Nightmares, Dolly, are only dreams gone wrong. And dreams, like crimes, have their patterns. We're dealing with someone who planned carefully. 2 girls, 2 deaths, 2 very different stages. The question is why?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp, glinting with the focus of a hunter scenting a trail. The majestic hotel loomed ahead, its white facade a beacon of elegance against the gray sea. The lobby was quieter today, the holidaymakers subdued by the weight of recent events. Mr. Prescott, the manager, greeted them with a strained smile, his hands fidgeting with a pen. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, the police have been here all morning, questioning everyone. It's chaos. Guests are talking of leaving." He lowered his voice. "They found another body, I hear." "A schoolgirl?" Dolly nodded, her face pale. "Pamela Reeves, in a quarry. It's dreadful." Miss Marple's eyes met Prescott's. "Have the police spoken to Mr. Jefferson's party again, or to the staff who knew Ruby Keene?" "They've been through the whole hotel," Prescott said, his voice tight. "Mr. Jefferson's beside himself, poor man. Miss Turner's keeping the dancers in line, but you can see she's shaken. Mr. Gaskell and Mrs. Jefferson, they're cooperating, but—" He trailed off, as if unwilling to voice his suspicions. "But?" Miss Marple prompted, her tone gentle but insistent. Prescott hesitated, then leaned closer. "They're not themselves, that's all. Mr. Gaskell's too jovial, like he's trying to laugh it off. Mrs. Jefferson barely speaks. And Miss Turner, she's all business, but her eyes are red, like she's been crying in private." He shook his head. "It's not my place to say, but something's off." Miss Marple nodded, storing the observation away. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. May we see the night porter? I understand he saw Ruby last." Prescott led them to a small office behind the reception desk, where the night porter, a wiry man named Tompkins, sat nursing a cup of tea. His face was lined with fatigue, his eyes darting nervously as Miss Marple and Dolly entered. "I've told the police everything," he said, his voice defensive. "I don't know what else I can say." Miss Marple smiled, her manner soothing. "Just tell us what you saw, Mr. Tompkins. Every detail helps, even the smallest." Tompkins rubbed his hands together, as if warming them against a chill only he felt. "It was late, past midnight. Ruby came through the lobby dressed in her dance costume, sparkly, like always. She was with a man, not one of the regulars. Dark coat, hat pulled low. They were talking quiet-like, heading for the terrace. I didn't think much of it. Girls like Ruby always had admirers. But she looked, I don't know, nervous, maybe. Not her usual self." Dolly leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Did you hear what they said?" Tompkins shook his head. Not a word. They were too far off. I saw them go out the terrace doors, and that was the last of her. I locked up at 1, like always, and went to my rounds. He paused, frowning. Funny thing, though. I checked the terrace later, and there was no one there. Just a cigarette stub, still smoldering. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes bright. A cigarette stub? Did you keep it? Tompkins flushed. No, miss. Tossed it in the bin. Didn't think it mattered till the police started asking questions. Miss Marple nodded, her face unreadable. And this man, could you describe him further? Not really, Tompkins admitted. He kept his face turned away like he didn't want to be seen, medium height maybe, and a posh sort of voice. That's all I got. He shifted uncomfortably. I told Inspector Slack the same. He wasn't happy I didn't see more. Dolly, unable to contain herself, burst out. But that's something, Jane. A man in a dark coat with Ruby, just before she died. It could be the killer. Could be, Miss Marple said softly, her gaze distant. Or it could be another piece of the puzzle meant to lead us astray. She thanked Tompkins and rose, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. As they left the office, she murmured to Dolly, Timing, my dear, is everything. Ruby was seen at midnight, yet her body was in your library by morning, miles away. We must find out how she got there, and why. Their next stop was Conway Jefferson's suite, where the atmosphere was heavy with grief and tension. Conway sat by the window, his wheelchair angled toward the sea, his face etched with exhaustion. Mark Gaskell lounged in an armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, while Adelaide Jefferson sat on a sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Josie Turner was absent, rehearsing with the dancers, but her presence lingered in Conway's strained expression. Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, Conway said, his voice hoarse. I hear there's another girl dead. Is it true? His eyes, red-rimmed, searched theirs for answers. Dolly nodded, her voice gentle. A schoolgirl, Pamela Reeves, found in a quarry, burned. The police think it's connected to Ruby. Conway's hands clenched, his knuckles white. Connected? How? Ruby was... She was special. Who would do this? His voice broke, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking. Miss Marple, her eyes soft but keen, spoke quietly. Mr. Jefferson, Ruby's death has stirred many questions. The police say she was killed elsewhere and moved to Gossington Hall. Can you think of anyone who might have wished her harm? Conway shook his head, his face a mask of pain. No one. She was a light, a joy. I was going to give her a future, adopt her, make it legal. She deserved that. He paused, his voice hardening. If anyone resented her, they never showed it to my face. Mark Gaskell set his glass down with a clink, his smile tight. Resented? Come now, Conway, let's not be dramatic. Ruby was a nice girl, but she had a knack for getting attention. Some people might have found that grating. His tone was light, but there was an edge to it, and Miss Marple noted the way Adelaide's hands tightened in her lap. Mr. Gaskell, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. Where were you last night after Ruby's performance? Mark's eyebrows rose, but he answered readily. At the casino in Danemouth, played cards till 1, maybe 2. Plenty of people saw me. His smile was charming, but Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the faint tension in his jaw. And you, Mrs. Jefferson? She asked, turning to Adelaide. Adelaide's voice was low, almost inaudible. I was in my room, reading. I didn't go out. Her eyes flicked to Conway, then away, and Miss Marple noted the quiet despair in her posture. Dolly, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. It's such a lovely hotel. I'm sure Ruby loved working here." Conway's face softened. "She did. She said it was her chance to shine. I saw in her what I lost, my Rosamond, my daughter. Ruby gave me that back." His voice cracked, and Miss Marple, her heart touched, saw the depth of his loss. But her mind remained clear, sifting through the alibis like cards in a deck. They left the suite and headed to the ballroom, where Josie Turner was overseeing a rehearsal. The dancers moved with mechanical precision, their faces strained. Josie, spotting them, called a break and approached, her expression guarded. "Any progress?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Miss Marple's eyes met hers, gentle but probing. "The police are exploring all avenues, Miss Turner. Can you tell us where you were last night, after Ruby left the stage?" Josie's lips tightened, but she answered smoothly. "Rehearsing, here in the ballroom, alone, after the others left. I needed to work on a new routine." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted the way her eyes flicked to the side, as if checking for an audience. "Alone?" Dolly asked, her tone skeptical. "At midnight?" "It's not unusual," Josie said, her voice sharp. "Dancers work late. Ruby knew that." She turned away, calling the girls back to work, and Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the brittleness in Josie's manner. As they left the ballroom, Dolly whispered, "Jane, none of their stories hold up. Mark at the casino, Adelaide reading, Josie rehearsing alone. It's all too convenient." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking as they walked through the lobby. "Convenient, yes, but not airtight. Alibis are like lace, Dolly. Beautiful until you pull at the threads." Her thoughts drifted to a long-ago scandal in St. Mary Mead, when a young man's alibi for a theft had crumbled under scrutiny. "We must check their stories, discreetly. The night porter's man in the dark coat is a clue, but it's not the whole story." Back in the car, Dolly's frustration spilled over. "Jane, it's like chasing shadows. 2 girls dead, and everyone's lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. How do we find the killer?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, her voice soft but certain. "By watching, Dolly. People reveal themselves in what they don't say, in the glances they avoid, the gestures they can't control. The killer chose your library for a reason, and Pamela's death for another. We're close to the truth. I can feel it." She paused, her needles still. "Tomorrow, we must dig deeper. The Majestic holds the answers, and someone there knows more than they're letting on." As they drove back to St. Mary Mead, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky streaked with pink and gold. But Miss Marple's mind was on darker things. The man in the dark coat, the smoldering cigarette, the alibis that didn't quite fit. Like a knitter working a complex pattern, she was patient, knowing that each stitch, each clue, would lead her closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 7. A Village Parallel. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, hinting at autumn's approach as Dolly Bantry and Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room of Gossington Hall. The house, usually a haven of comfort, felt shadowed by the twin tragedies of Ruby Keene's body in the library and Pamela Reeves's charred remains in Ven's quarry. Dolly, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, stared out at the garden, her face drawn. "Jane, it's too much," she said, her voice low. "2 girls dead, and we're no closer to understanding why. I feel like we're stumbling in the dark." Miss Marple, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, looked up, her eyes bright and steady. "Not stumbling, Dolly, but circling. Each step takes us closer to the center of the maze. She paused, her fingers stilling briefly. The killer has woven a clever web. 2 deaths, 2 locations, 2 stories meant to confuse. But webs, my dear, are fragile things when you know where to pull. Her voice was calm, but there was a steel beneath it, a certainty that Dolly clung to like a lifeline. The telephone rang, and Dolly answered, her expression tightening as Inspector. Slack's voice crackled through. Mrs. Bantry, we've been digging into the alibis from the Majestic. Mark Gaskell's casino story checks out. 3 witnesses saw him there till 1:30. Adelaide Jefferson's maid confirms she was in her room, though no one can vouch for her after 11. Josie Turner's a blank. No one saw her in the ballroom after 10. He paused, his tone grudging. Thought you and Miss Marple might want to know before we head back to the hotel. Dolly relayed the information to Miss Marple, who nodded thoughtfully. Gaps in alibis are like holes in a net, she said. They let the truth slip through. Josie's solitude in the ballroom is interesting, and Mark's charm at the casino, perhaps too convenient. She set her knitting aside. We must return to Danemouth, Dolly, but first I want to visit the village chemist. There's a question I need answered. Dolly frowned, puzzled. The chemist? Whatever for? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A hunch, my dear. Sometimes the smallest detail unravels the largest knot. She rose, adjusting her hat with a briskness that belied her age. Come, let's make our inquiries before the day grows old. The village chemist, Mr. Brooks, ran a tidy shop on the high street, its shelves lined with bottles and jars that gleamed in the morning light. He greeted them with a nod, his round face curious but cautious. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, what brings you here? Not feeling poorly, I hope. Not at all, Mr. Brooks, Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. I'm merely curious about a purchase made recently. Have you had any requests for sleeping powders, perhaps by someone from Danemouth? A young woman, say, connected to the Majestic Hotel. Brooks's brow furrowed, and he flipped through his ledger. Now that you mention it, yes. Miss Josie Turner came in a few days ago, said she was having trouble sleeping, what with her cousin's performances and all. Bought a bottle of chloral hydrate. Nothing unusual, mind you. I made sure to warn her about the dosage. He paused, his eyes narrowing. This about the Keene girl, isn't it? Miss Marple's expression remained serene. Just tying up loose ends, Mr. Brooks. Thank you. As they left the shop, Dolly's eyes widened. Jane, do you think Josie drugged Ruby? Is that why she was moved so easily? Not so fast, Dolly, Miss Marple cautioned, her voice low. Chloral hydrate is a common enough remedy, but its presence is suggestive. We must be careful not to leap. Her thoughts, however, were racing, recalling a village incident years ago when a young woman had used sleeping powders to quiet a rival, only to be caught by her own carelessness. Let's go to the Majestic. We need to test these alibis further. The drive to Danemouth was quiet, Dolly's mind churning with questions she didn't voice. The Majestic Hotel, as they arrived, seemed to wear its grandeur like a mask, its polished surfaces hiding the tension beneath. The lobby was less crowded today, the whispers of guests more subdued, as if the weight of 2 deaths had finally settled over the place. Mr. Prescott, the manager, met them with a weary nod. The police are upstairs with Mr. Jefferson again, he said. It's been a strain on him. Miss Turner's in the ballroom, and Mr. Gaskell and Mrs. Jefferson are in the lounge. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Let's start with the lounge, Dolly. I'd like to observe our friends in their natural habitat. They entered the lounge, a spacious room with tall windows and wicker chairs, where Mark Gaskell sat with a newspaper, his legs crossed, and Adelaide Jefferson sipped tea, her face pale and composed. The air between them was heavy, as if words had been spoken and regretted. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," Mark said, folding his paper with a practiced smile. "Come to join the circus? The police are turning this place upside down." His tone was light, but his eyes were wary, and Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tapped the armrest. "We're just trying to help," Dolly said, her voice firm. "2 girls are dead, Mr. Gaskell. It's no circus to us." Adelaide looked up, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's briefly. "It's horrible," she said softly. "Pamela Reeves, she was just a child. I can't imagine." Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her tea, her hands trembling slightly. Miss Marple sat opposite them, her knitting bag at her feet. "Mr. Gaskell, your evening at the casino sounds lively. Did you see Ruby at all that night, before you left?" Mark shook his head, his smile unwavering. "Not a glimpse. I was out the door by 9, cards and whiskey all night. Ask anyone at the Golden Palm. They'll tell you I was there." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes flicked to Adelaide. "And you, Mrs. Jefferson?" Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle. "You were reading, I believe. Anything particularly engrossing?" Adelaide's lips parted, then closed. "Just a novel," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't recall the title. I was tired." Her fingers twisted the edge of her napkin, and Miss Marple noted the gesture, so like a village girl caught in a lie. Before they could press further, Inspector Slack entered, his face flushed with purpose. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, a word." He led them to a quiet corner of the lounge, his voice low. "We've got a lead on Pamela Reeves. A witness saw a girl matching her description near the pier at 7, talking to a man in a dark coat. Matches the porter's story about Ruby. Could be the same fellow." Dolly's eyes widened. "The man in the dark coat? Jane, that's the link." Miss Marple's expression remained calm, but her mind was alight. A link, yes, but not the whole chain. "Did your witness describe this man further, Inspector?" Slack shook his head. "Not much to go on. Medium build, hat low, kept to the shadows. The witness, a fisherman, wasn't close enough to hear anything. But it's something." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're thinking it's a setup, aren't you?" "Not a setup," Miss Marple said softly, "but a performance. The man in the dark coat is a character in someone's play, meant to draw our attention. We must look behind the curtain." She turned to Dolly. "Let's speak to Josie Turner again. Her rehearsal alibi is thin." The ballroom was alive with the sound of music and the shuffle of dancers' feet. Josie stood at the center, her arms crossed, her face a mask of control as she watched a young dancer falter through a step. When she saw Miss Marple and Dolly, her expression tightened, but she dismissed the girls with a sharp clap. 10 minutes, ladies. Don't dawdle." She approached, her eyes guarded. "Back again? The police have already grilled me." Miss Marple smiled, her manner disarming. "Just a few questions, Miss Turner. You said you were rehearsing alone after 10. Did anyone see you, even briefly?" Josie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Number I told you. I was working on a new routine. The girls were gone. The staff were busy. It was just me and the music." Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, clenching the towel she held. Dolly, emboldened, pressed further. "And the sleeping powders you bought from Mr. Brooks in St. Mary Mead, were they for you or for Ruby?" Josie's eyes flashed, but she recovered quickly. "For me. My nerves have been shot, with all the work here. Ruby had nothing to do with it." Her tone was sharp, and she turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. As they left the ballroom, Dolly whispered, "She's hiding something, Jane. I can feel it." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking as they walked through the lobby. Hiding, yes, but not alone. Josie's story is too neat, like a dress tailored to fit, and Mark's casino alibi, Adelaide's quiet evening, they're all part of the same fabric. Her thoughts drifted to a village scandal years ago, when a young woman had posed as another to secure an inheritance, her alibi unraveling under the weight of small inconsistencies. "We need more, Dolly, a thread to pull." That afternoon they visited the Golden Palm Casino, a glittering establishment in Danemouth's heart. The manager, a portly man named Harris, confirmed Mark's presence the previous night. "Oh, he was here all right," Harris said, polishing a glass. "Played poker till 2, won a tidy sum. Bit of a show-off, but a good sport." He paused, frowning. "Though he did step out for a bit, maybe half an hour, around 11. Said he needed air." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Half an hour," she murmured. "Time enough for mischief." She thanked Harris and led Dolly back to the car, her mind turning over the new piece of the puzzle. Back at Gossington Hall, the evening settled over the house like a heavy curtain. Colonel Bantry, pacing the study, greeted them with a scowl. "This is getting ridiculous, Dolly. 2 girls dead, and now you're chasing alibis in Danemouth? Let the police handle it." Dolly, exhausted, sank into a chair. "I wish we could, Arthur, but it's our library. It feels personal." She turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, what's next? I'm at my wit's end." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her voice calm. "We watch, Dolly, and we listen. The man in the dark coat, the sleeping powders, the gaps in time. These are clues, not answers. The killer has played a clever game, using your library to distract, Pamela's death to confuse. But games have rules, and we're learning them." She paused, her eyes distant. "Tomorrow, we must press harder. Someone at the Majestic knows the truth, and they're beginning to slip." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to St. Mary Mead, to a time when a village girl's ambition had led to betrayal, her carefully crafted story undone by a single careless word. The parallel was clear, and Miss Marple, with the patience of a knitter working a complex pattern, was determined to find the thread that would unravel this crime. Chapter 8. The Trap is Set. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Gossington Hall, casting a soft glow across the morning room where Dolly Bantry and Miss Jane Marple sat. The air was thick with the weight of recent days, the body of Ruby Keene in the library, Pamela Reeves's charred remains in Ven's quarry, and a tangle of alibis that refused to align. Dolly, her hands fidgeting with a teaspoon, looked at her friend with a mixture of hope and exasperation. "Jane, we're drowning in clues, but nothing fits. 2 girls dead, a man in a dark coat, sleeping powders. It's like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing." Miss Marple, her knitting needles moving with their usual steady rhythm, glanced up, her eyes bright and unyielding. "Not missing, Dolly, merely misplaced. The pieces are there, but we must arrange them correctly." She paused, her fingers stilling briefly. "The killer has been clever, using your library as a stage and Pamela's death as a distraction. But cleverness leaves traces, and we're close to finding them. Her voice was calm, but there was a quiet intensity beneath it, a certainty that steadied Dolly's fraying nerves. The telephone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the room. Dolly answered, her face tightening as Inspector Slack's voice came through, brisk and impatient. "Mrs. Bantry, we've been over the Majestic again. No new leads on the man in the dark coat, but we're digging into Josie Turner's purchase of those sleeping powders. The chemist's records check out. She bought enough, chloral hydrate, to knock out a horse. We're bringing her in for questioning this afternoon." He hesitated, then added, "If you and Miss Marple have anything to add, now's the time." Dolly relayed the message, her eyes wide. "Jane, they're focusing on Josie. Do you think she's the key?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "A key, perhaps, but not the lock. Josie's purchase is suggestive, but we mustn't rush to judgment. The killer wants us to look one way while they slip out another." She set her knitting aside and rose, adjusting her hat with a briskness that belied her age. "We must return to Danemouth, Dolly, but first I have an idea. A small trap to see who startles." Dolly frowned, puzzled. "A trap? What kind?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A whisper, carefully placed. If we let it be known that Pamela Reeves's body has been positively identified and suggest that the police are close to an arrest, it may shake loose the truth. People, my dear, reveal themselves when they're afraid." She paused, her voice softening. "Like old Mrs. Carter in the village, who confessed to stealing church funds when she thought the vicar was watching." Dolly's face lit up, a spark of hope returning. "Jane, that's brilliant, but how do we spread the word without it seeming suspicious?" "Leave that to me," Miss Marple said, her tone serene but firm. "A word to Mrs. Price at the vicarage, and the village will do the rest. By noon, it will reach Danemouth." She gathered her knitting bag, her movements purposeful. "Come, let's visit the vicarage before we go to the Majestic." The vicarage was a quaint, ivy-covered house, its garden a riot of late summer roses. Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, welcomed them with a flurry of sympathy and curiosity. "Dolly, Miss Marple, what a dreadful business! 2 girls dead, and in our own village." She ushered them into the parlor, where tea was promptly served. "The whole of St. Mary Mead is talking. Some say it's a maniac, others think it's connected to that hotel in Danemouth." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of mild interest. "Indeed, Mrs. Price, the police are making progress, you know. They've identified the second body, Pamela Reeves, the schoolgirl, and I hear they're very close to an arrest." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, her eyes watching Mrs. Price's reaction. Mrs. Price's cup rattled in its saucer. "An arrest? Good heavens, who?" Her voice was eager, her eyes bright with the thrill of gossip. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Oh, I shouldn't say more. The police are being very discreet, but it's only a matter of time, they say." She changed the subject smoothly, asking about the vicar's sermon, but the seed was planted. Mrs. Price, a known conduit of village news, would ensure the rumor spread like wildfire. By midday, as Dolly and Miss Marple arrived at the Majestic Hotel, the whisper had already reached Danemouth. The lobby hummed with subdued excitement, guests exchanging glances and murmurs. Mr. Prescott, the manager, greeted them with a nervous nod. "The police are upstairs with Miss Turner," he said, his voice low. "And the guests are talking, something about an arrest. Is it true?" Dolly, catching Miss Marple's eye, managed a vague smile. "The police are working hard, Mr. Prescott. We're just here to help." Miss Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, said nothing, but her eyes scanned the lobby, noting the tension in the air. They headed to the lounge, where Mark Gaskell sat with a whiskey, his usual charm tempered by a restless energy. Adelaide Jefferson was absent, but Conway Jefferson was there, his wheelchair by the window, his face etched with exhaustion. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, his voice heavy. "I hear there's talk of an arrest. Is it true? Have they found Ruby's killer?" Miss Marple sat opposite him, her manner gentle but probing. "The police are following many leads, Mr. Jefferson. The identification of Pamela Reeves has given them new direction. But tell me, did Ruby ever speak of Pamela or of any film auditions?" Conway frowned, his hands clenching the arms of his chair. "No, never. Ruby was focused on her dancing, though she did mention a film offer once, a man who said he could get her a screen test. I told her to be cautious. She laughed, said it was just talk." His eyes darkened. "If I'd known—" Mark set his glass down with a sharp clink, his smile tight. Ruby was always chasing pipe dreams, films, fame. She thought she was destined for greatness. Didn't always sit well with folks around here. His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the way. His fingers drummed on the table, a nervous tick he couldn't quite hide. Before she could press further, a commotion in the lobby drew their attention. Inspector Slack strode in, followed by 2 officers escorting Josie Turner, her face pale but composed. "Miss Turner's coming with us for questioning," Slack announced, his voice carrying. "We'll need statements from everyone else, too." The room buzzed, guests whispering, and Miss Marple watched closely, noting Mark's sudden stillness, Conway's look of shock, and the faint flush on Josie's cheeks. Dolly whispered, "Jane, your trap's working. Look at them." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but she kept her voice low. "Not yet, Dolly. We've only stirred the nest. Now we watch who flies." She rose, suggesting they follow Josie to the hotel's private office, where the police were setting up. In the office, Josie sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap. Inspector Slack loomed over her, his notebook open. "Miss Turner, let's go over it again. You bought chloral hydrate from the chemist in St. Mary, Mead. You say it was for your nerves, but we've got a witness saying you were seen, slipping something into Ruby's drink the night she died. Care to explain?" Josie's eyes widened, but her voice was steady. "That's nonsense. I bought the powders for myself. I've been under strain with the shows and Ruby's demands. She was my cousin, not my enemy." Her tone was defiant, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided Slack's. Dolly, unable to stay silent, leaned forward. "Josie, if you know anything, please tell us. 2 girls are dead. You must have seen something." Josie's lips parted, then closed. For a moment, her composure cracked, and her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't hurt her," she said, her voice breaking. "I gave her a powder that night, yes, but only to help her sleep. She was so wound up, talking about her big plans. I thought I was helping." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her face impassive, but her mind racing. "Miss Turner," she said gently, "who else knew you gave Ruby the powder?" Josie looked up, her eyes red. "No one. I didn't tell anyone. It was just between us." Her voice was low, but there was a desperation in it, and Miss Marple stored the detail away, like a scrap of yarn for later use. Inspector Slack, unimpressed, snapped his notebook shut. "We'll need you at the station, Miss Turner. Don't leave the hotel." He turned to Miss Marple, his scowl softening slightly. "You've got a knack for stirring things up, Miss Marple. That rumor about an arrest, it's got everyone jumpy." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Sometimes, Inspector, a little pressure reveals what's hidden." As they left the office, she murmured to Dolly, "Josie's not telling the whole truth. She's protecting someone, or herself. But the sleeping powder is a thread we must follow." That evening, back at Gossington Hall, Dolly poured sherry with unsteady hands. "Jane, Josie's confession changes everything. If she drugged Ruby, she could have killed her." "Not so fast," Miss Marple said, her voice calm. "Josie's admission is a piece, not the picture. The powder may have made Ruby vulnerable, but the murder required planning, moving the body, staging the scene in your library, burning Pamela's remains. That's not the work of one person alone." Her eyes gleamed, and she resumed her knitting. The click of her needles, a steady rhythm in the quiet room. Colonel Bantry, pacing the study, joined them, his face red with frustration. "This is madness, Dolly. 2 girls, a drugged dancer, a burnt car. Our house is at the center of it, and I can't stand it." He turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, you've got to sort this out. The village is saying we're cursed." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Not cursed, Colonel, but chosen. Your library was a deliberate stage, meant to distract or accuse. And Pamela's death, her body, burned, yet her bracelet left to be found, tells me the killer wanted us to know her identity, but not Ruby's. Or perhaps the reverse." She paused, her eyes distant. "I'm reminded of a village girl, years ago, who posed as another to claim an inheritance. Her plan was clever, but it fell apart because she forgot one thing. People notice details." Dolly sank into a chair, her face pale. "What's the detail here, Jane? I can't see it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft but certain. "The detail is in the timing, Dolly. Ruby was seen at midnight, yet her body was in your library by morning. Pamela was lured to an audition at 7, and her body burned by night's end. Someone wove these events together, and we're close to finding the thread that binds them." She leaned back, her eyes bright. "Tomorrow, we must watch closely. The trap is set, and someone will slip." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to St. Mary Mead, to a time when a young man's lies had unraveled under the weight of a single careless act. The parallel was clear, and she knew, with the patience of a knitter working a complex pattern, that the truth was near, waiting only for the right moment to be revealed. Chapter 9. The Confession. The morning light filtered through the mist that hung over St. Mary Mead, softening the village's edges and lending an ethereal quality to the familiar lanes. At Gossington Hall, the weight of the unsolved murders, Ruby Keene in the library, Pamela Reeves in the charred wreck of a car, pressed heavily on Dolly Bantry. She sat in the drawing room, her hands twisting a handkerchief, her eyes darting to the closed library door as if it might spring open to reveal another horror. Across from her, Miss Jane Marple, knitted with her usual calm, the soft click of her needles a steady rhythm in the tense silence. Yet her eyes, bright and unyielding, betrayed the intensity of her thoughts, weaving through the tangled threads of the case. "Jane," Dolly said, her voice strained. "Josie's confession about the sleeping powder. It's chilling. Do you think she's the killer? Or is she covering for someone?" The rumor Miss Marple had planted through Mrs. Price about an imminent arrest had stirred the pot, and Dolly could feel the ripples spreading, though she couldn't yet see their shape. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze lifting to meet Dolly's. "Josie's admission is a piece of the puzzle, my dear, but not the whole picture. The sleeping powder explains how Ruby was subdued, perhaps, but not why her body was moved to your library, nor why Pamela Reeves was killed and burned. This is a crime of calculation, not impulse." Her voice was soft but firm, like a teacher guiding a pupil toward clarity. "We must return to the majestic today. The trap we set is working. Someone is nervous, and nervous people make mistakes." Dolly nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then, let's go. I can't bear sitting here, waiting for the police to unravel it." She rose, grabbing her coat, and Miss Marple followed, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, her hat slightly askew, but her demeanor unshakably composed. The drive to Danemouth was quiet, the mist parting to reveal the sea's gray expanse as they approached the majestic hotel. The grand building seemed to loom larger today, its white facade a mask over the secrets within. The lobby was subdued, the usual bustle of holidaymakers replaced by hushed whispers and furtive glances. News of Josie's questioning had spread, fueled by the rumor of an impending arrest, and the air crackled with tension. Mr. Prescott, the manager, greeted them with a strained smile, his hands fidgeting with a stack of papers. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, the police are back, poking into everything. Miss Turner's in a state. She's been questioned twice today. Mr. Jefferson's locked himself in his suite, and Mr. Gaskell and Mrs. Jefferson are keeping to themselves." He lowered his voice. "The guests are talking of nothing but arrests. It's bad for business." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her face remained serene. "Truth, Mr. Prescott, is often inconvenient. May we see Miss Turner? I have a few questions for her." Prescott hesitated, then nodded. "She's in the rehearsal room, though she's not herself. Follow me." He led them through the labyrinthine corridors to the ballroom, where the dancers moved listlessly under Josie's sharp commands. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, but her voice was steady as she corrected a girl's pirouette. When she saw Miss Marple and Dolly, her posture stiffened, and she dismissed the dancers with a curt wave. "Take a break, girls. Back in 10. Josie approached, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "What now?" "I've told the police everything, about the powder, about Ruby. I didn't hurt her." Her voice was defiant, but there was a tremor in it, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands gripped her elbows, as if holding herself together. Miss Marple's tone was gentle, almost maternal. "Miss Turner, no one doubts your affection for Ruby, but the sleeping powder, you said you gave it to help her rest. Did anyone else know you'd done so? Anyone who might have taken advantage?" Josie's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in her armor. "No one. I didn't tell a soul. Ruby asked for something to calm her nerves. She was so excited about her plans, talking about films and fame. I thought I was helping." Her voice broke, and she looked away, her jaw tight. "I never thought she'd die." Dolly, her heart softening, leaned forward. "Josie, if you know anything else, anything at all, you must tell us. 2 girls are dead. Someone used your powder, maybe, to make this happen." Josie's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "Used my powder? You think I'd let that happen? Ruby was my cousin, my family." Her voice rose, drawing the attention of a passing maid, and she lowered it quickly. "I don't know who did this, but it wasn't me." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp, sifting through Josie's words. "Of course, my dear. But sometimes we see things without realizing their importance. Did Ruby mention anyone new in her life? A friend, perhaps? Or someone who paid her too much attention?" Josie hesitated, her hands unclenching slightly. "There was a man, a guest here. He watched her dance, sent her flowers once or twice. Ruby laughed it off, said he was just smitten. I told her to be careful, but she never listened." Her voice grew bitter. She thought she could handle anything. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. "This man, did you see him or hear his name?" Josie shook her head. "Never got a good look. He kept to himself, always in the shadows. Ruby called him her mystery man, like it was a game." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "You think he's the one, don't you?" "Not yet," Miss Marple said, her voice calm. "But every detail helps. Thank you, Miss Turner." As they left the ballroom, Dolly whispered, "Jane, she's hiding something. I can feel it." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as they walked through the lobby. "She's frightened, Dolly, and frightened people hold their secrets tight. But Josie's not alone in this. There's a pattern here, and we're close to seeing it." Her thoughts drifted to a village scandal years ago, when a young woman's lies about a stolen necklace had crumbled under pressure, revealing a deeper betrayal. "We must speak to Mr. Jefferson's family next. They're feeling the trap, too." In Conway Jefferson's suite, the atmosphere was heavy with grief and suspicion. Conway sat by the window, his wheelchair angled toward the sea, his face etched with exhaustion. Mark Gaskell paced the room, a cigarette burning between his fingers, while Adelaide Jefferson sat on a sofa, her hands folded tightly, her eyes fixed on the floor. The rumor of an arrest had clearly reached them, and the air was thick with unspoken questions. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple?" Conway said, his voice rough. "I hear the police are closing in. Is it true?" His eyes, red with unshed tears, searched theirs for hope. Dolly hesitated, glancing at Miss Marple, who spoke calmly. "The police are making progress. Mr. Jefferson, the identification of Pamela Reeves has given them new leads, but we need your help. Did Ruby ever mention a man who sent her flowers? Perhaps someone she called her mystery man?" Conway frowned, his hands clenching. "She did, once. Said he was harmless, just a fan. I didn't like it, told her to steer clear. But Ruby, she had a way of charming everyone." His voice broke, and he looked away, his grief palpable. Mark stopped pacing, his smile thin. Ruby had a knack for attracting attention. Flowers, notes, the works. Half the men in the hotel were smitten. His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the edge in his voice, the way his eyes flicked to Adelaide. Adelaide spoke, her voice low. She was young, full of dreams. It's no wonder people noticed her. Her words were measured, but her hands betrayed her, twisting the edge of her skirt. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the gesture, so like a village girl caught in a moment of guilt. Before they could press further, Inspector Slack burst into the room, his face flushed with purpose. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, we've found something in Gaskell's room. Care to join us?" He strode out, expecting them to follow, and Dolly, her heart pounding, hurried after him, Miss Marple trailing with her usual calm. In Mark's room, a small upstairs suite, the police had uncovered a hidden compartment in a dresser drawer. Inside was a velvet pouch containing a sapphire brooch and a pair of earrings. items Ruby had been seen wearing during her performances. Mark, standing by the window, turned pale, his cigarette dropping to the floor. "Those aren't mine," he said, his voice sharp. "I've never seen them before." Slack's eyes narrowed. "Found in your room, Gaskell. Care to explain?" Mark's charm faltered, his hands shaking. I don't know how they got there. Someone's setting me up." His eyes darted to Conway, then to Miss Marple, as if seeking an ally. "I was at the casino, I told you. I didn't touch Ruby." Dolly, stunned, whispered to Miss Marple, "Jane, this is it. He's the killer." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was racing. "Not so fast, Dolly. The jewelry is a clue, but not a confession. Someone placed it there, perhaps to point the finger at Mark, perhaps to distract us." She turned to Slack. "Inspector, have you searched the other rooms? Mrs. Jefferson's, Miss Turner's?" Slack grunted, clearly annoyed at the suggestion. "We're getting to it, but this is damning enough for now." He turned to Mark. "You're coming with us, Gaskell. Don't make a fuss." As Mark was led away, protesting, Conway's face crumpled. "Mark? No, it can't be. He's family." His voice trailed off, and Adelaide rose, her face pale, to comfort him. Miss Marple watched them closely, noting the way Adelaide's hand lingered on Conway's shoulder, the quiet intensity in her eyes. Back in the lobby, Dolly's voice was urgent. "Jane, what's happening? First Josie's powder, now Mark's jewelry. Are they in it together?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her voice calm. "Together, perhaps, but not alone. The jewelry in Mark's room is too convenient, like a prop placed for us to find. And Josie's confession, it protects her, but only to a point. Someone else is pulling the strings." Her thoughts drifted to Saint. Mary Mead, to a time when a young man had been framed for theft, his guilt assumed until a single detail, a misplaced letter, revealed the true culprit. "We must keep watching, Dolly. The trap is closing and someone will break." That evening, at Gossington Hall, the fire crackled in the drawing room as Dolly poured sherry with trembling hands. Colonel Bantry, pacing, exploded with frustration. "This is intolerable, Dolly. Our home, a murder scene, and now you're chasing jewel thieves and drugged dancers. Let Slack handle it." Dolly, her patience fraying, snapped, "Arthur, it's our library. I can't just sit here while Jane's unraveling it." She turned to Miss Marple, her eyes pleading. "What's next, Jane? I feel like we're so close, but I can't see it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft but certain. "We're close, Dolly, because the killer is nervous. The jewelry, the powder, the man in the dark coat. These are threads, and they're beginning to tangle. Someone wanted Ruby out of the way, and Pamela's death was part of the plan. Tomorrow, we must press harder. The truth is there, waiting for us to see it." She leaned back, her eyes gleaming, and resumed her knitting. The click of her needles, a promise that the mystery, however dark, would soon be laid bare. Chapter 10. The Final Piece. The morning mist had burned away, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in a crisp, golden light that belied the darkness of the mystery enveloping Gossington Hall. Dolly Bantry sat in the morning room, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea gone cold, her eyes darting toward the library door as if it might yield answers to the horrors it had witnessed. Across from her, Miss Jane Marple knitted with her characteristic calm, the soft click of her needles, a steady counterpoint to the tension in the air. The discoveries of Ruby Keene's body in the library, Pamela Reeves's charred remains in a quarry, and the recent revelations, Josie Turner's sleeping powders, and the jewelry found in Mark Gaskell's room had woven a complex web, and Miss Marple's sharp mind was intent on untangling it. "Jane," Dolly said, her voice taut. "Josie's confession about the powder, and now Mark with Ruby's jewelry. It's all coming together, isn't it? But I still can't see how it fits, or why our library was chosen." Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve, a nervous habit that betrayed her unease. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes lifting to meet Dolly's. "It's fitting together, my dear, like a pattern in a quilt. Each piece, Ruby's death, Pamela's murder, the jewelry, the powders, tells part of the story. The library was chosen to mislead, to point suspicion or buy time. But the final piece is near, Dolly. We must go back to the Majestic and look closely, for someone is about to falter." Her voice was soft but resolute, carrying the certainty of a woman who had unraveled many a village secret. The telephone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the room. Dolly answered, her face tightening, as Inspector Slack's voice came through, brusque and impatient. "Mrs. Bantry, we've questioned Gaskell and Turner again. Gaskell's sticking to his casino story, but he's sweating. Those jewels in his room have him rattled. Josie's clamming up, says she only gave Ruby the powder to help her sleep. We're searching the hotel again, but I thought you and Miss Marple might want to be here. Something's breaking." He hung up abruptly, leaving Dolly staring at the receiver. She turned to Miss Marple, her eyes wide. "Jane, they're closing in. Do you think Mark and Josie are in it together?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression serene, but her mind racing. "Together, perhaps, but not alone. The jewelry in Mark's room is too convenient, like a prop placed to distract. Josie's powder explains how Ruby was subdued, but not why Pamela was killed or why the library was chosen. There's a larger design here, Dolly, and we're close to seeing it." She rose, adjusting her hat with a briskness that belied her age. "Let's go to Danemouth. The truth is waiting, and we mustn't keep it." The drive to the Majestic Hotel was quiet, the rolling hills of the countryside giving way to the sea's gray expanse. The hotel's white facade gleamed under the sun, but its grandeur felt hollow, as if the building itself were weary of the secrets it held. The lobby was a study in contrasts, guests whispering in hushed tones, staff moving with forced efficiency, and the faint strain of a piano from the lounge, trying to maintain an air of normalcy. Mr. Prescott, the manager, greeted them with a nervous nod, his hands fidgeting with a pen. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, the police are everywhere. Mr. Jefferson's in his suite, refusing to see anyone. Mr. Gaskell's with the police, and Mrs. Jefferson's in the garden. Miss Turner's back in the ballroom, but she's unsteady." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Unsteady, you say? That's promising. May we see Mrs. Jefferson first? A quiet word in the garden might be illuminating." Prescott nodded, leading them through the French doors to the hotel's manicured gardens, where roses bloomed in defiant splendor against the backdrop of tragedy. Adelaide Jefferson sat on a wrought-iron bench, a book open in her lap but unread, her eyes fixed on the distant sea. Her face was pale, her posture rigid, as if holding herself together by sheer will. When she saw Dolly and Miss Marple, she managed a faint smile. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, I didn't expect you. It's been difficult." Her voice was low, almost inaudible, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands clutched the book, her knuckles white. "We won't intrude long. Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "Mrs. Jefferson, the police are making progress. The jewelry found in Mr. Gaskell's room has raised questions. Did you ever see Ruby wearing those pieces?" Adelaide's eyes flickered, but she shook her head. I don't recall. Ruby had so many trinkets, gifts from admirers. I didn't pay much attention." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in her hands, the way her gaze darted away. Dolly, emboldened by Miss Marple's calm, pressed further. "And the night Ruby died? You were in your room, reading, you said. Did you hear anything? Anything at all?" Adelaide's lips parted, then closed. "Nothing unusual. The hotel's always noisy. Music, footsteps. I was tired. I went to bed early." Her words were measured, but Miss Marple noted the strain in her voice, like a string stretched too tight. Before they could continue, a shadow fell across the bench. Mark Gaskell approached, his usual charm replaced by a tense, almost haggard look. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped. "I've just come from the police. They're trying to pin this on me, but I swear I didn't touch Ruby. Those jewels were planted. I'd stake my life on it." His eyes darted to Adelaide, and Miss Marple caught a fleeting look between them, a silent communication she couldn't yet decipher. Miss Marple's tone remained mild. "Mr. Gaskell, you were at the casino, but you stepped out for half an hour around 11. Where did you go?" Mark's jaw tightened, but he answered readily. "For a walk, to clear my head. I'd had a few drinks, needed air. I didn't see Ruby, or anyone else for that matter." His voice was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way. His hands clenched, the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. Dolly, unable to stay silent, burst out, "But the jewelry, Mark. How did it end up in your room?" "I don't know," he snapped, then caught himself, his charm resurfacing like a mask. "Someone's framing me, that's clear. I cared about Ruby. She was like a kid sister to Conway. I wouldn't hurt her." His eyes flicked to Adelaide again, and Miss Marple stored the gesture away, like a scrap of yarn for later use. They left the garden, heading for the ballroom, where Josie Turner was overseeing a lackluster rehearsal. Her face was drawn, her movements sharp as she corrected a dancer's stance. When she saw Miss Marple and Dolly, her expression hardened, but she dismissed the girls with a wave. "What now?" she asked, her voice brittle. "I've told the police everything. I gave Ruby the powder to help her sleep, nothing more." Miss Marple's eyes met hers, gentle but unyielding. "Miss Turner, you said no one knew about the powder. But suppose someone did, someone who saw an opportunity. Did you ever leave Ruby alone that night after giving it to her?" Josie's hands froze on the towel she held, her eyes narrowing. I left her in her room around 11. She was drowsy, said she'd rest. I went back to the ballroom to practice." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple caught the flicker of fear in her eyes, like a deer sensing a predator. Dolly leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Josie, if you're protecting someone, you must tell us. 2 girls are dead." Josie's composure cracked, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm not protecting anyone. I loved Ruby. She was family. I didn't know the powder would. She broke off, her shoulders shaking, and Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of her story. Before they could press further, Inspector Slack strode into the ballroom, his face grim. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, we've got a witness, a groundskeeper who saw a car near the quarry the night Pamela died. Matches the description of one rented by Gaskell last week. He's in deep now." He turned to Josie. "And you, Miss Turner, don't leave the hotel. We're not done." Josie's face paled, but she nodded, her lips pressed tight. As Slack left, Miss Marple murmured to Dolly, "The net is tightening, but it's catching more than one fish. Mark's car, Josie's powder, they're pieces, but not the whole." That afternoon, Miss Marple insisted on a private meeting with Josie in the hotel's small library, a quiet room lined with books and heavy with the scent of leather. Josie sat stiffly, her hands clasped, her eyes wary. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice low. "I've told you everything." Miss Marple's tone was gentle, almost confiding. "Not everything, Miss Turner. You gave Ruby the powder, yes, but you knew her dreams, her plans with Mr. Jefferson. Did you resent them? Her chance at a fortune while you worked in her shadow?" Josie's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady. "Resent her? She was my cousin. I brought her here, gave her a job. I wanted her to succeed." Her words were firm, but Miss Marple caught the bitterness beneath, like a sour note in a melody. "And Pamela Reeves," Miss Marple continued, her eyes never leaving Josie's. "A girl who looked like Ruby, lured to an audition and killed. Was she chosen because of that resemblance? To make us think she was Ruby, perhaps?" Josie's breath caught, her hands trembling. "I don't know anything about Pamela. I didn't even know her." Her voice rose, and she stood, her composure crumbling. "You think I did this? You're wrong." She turned to leave, but Miss Marple's voice stopped her, soft but commanding. "Miss Turner, someone used your powder to subdue Ruby, and someone chose Pamela to confuse us. If you know who, you must speak, before it's too late." Her eyes were kind but piercing, and Josie faltered, her shoulders slumping. I can't," she whispered, then fled the room, her footsteps echoing in the hall. Dolly, stunned, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, she's breaking. Is she the killer?" "Not alone," Miss Marple said, her voice calm. "Josie's part of it, but there's another hand at work. The jewelry in Mark's room, the car at the quarry. It's too neat, like a story written to mislead. We must look at the whole picture." Her thoughts drifted to Saint. Mary Mead, to a time when a young woman's jealousy had led to theft, her guilt revealed by a single careless word. "The final piece is close, Dolly. We need one more push." Back at Gossington Hall that evening, the fire crackled in the drawing room as Dolly poured sherry with trembling hands. Colonel Bantry, pacing, exploded with frustration. "This is madness, Dolly. Our home a crime scene, and you're playing detective with Jane. Let Slack handle it." Dolly, her patience fraying, snapped. "Arthur, it's our library. I can't just sit here while Jane's unraveling it." She turned to Miss Marple, her eyes pleading. "What now, Jane?" Josie's cracking, Mark's cornered. "What's the final piece?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her voice steady. "The final piece is motive, Dolly. Ruby's death was about Conway's fortune, Pamela's about confusion. Someone wanted Ruby gone to secure their future, and Pamela was a decoy to muddle the timeline. Josie's powder and Mark's jewelry are threads, but the hand that wove them is still hidden." She leaned back, her eyes gleaming. "Tomorrow, we confront them all. The truth is there, waiting for us to claim it." As the firelight danced, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village, to a time when a man's greed had led to betrayal, his plan undone by a single overlooked detail. The parallel was clear, and she knew, with the patience of a knitter working a complex pattern, that the final piece would soon fall into place. Chapter 11. The Reckoning. The morning sun broke through the clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a pale, hopeful light across the village. But within Gossington Hall, the air remained heavy with the unresolved weight of 2 murders. Dolly Bantry sat in the drawing room, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. The discovery of Ruby Keene's body in their library, followed by Pamela Reeves's charred remains in a quarry, had turned their quiet life into a stage for tragedy. Across from her, Miss Jane Marple knitted with her usual calm, the soft click of her needles, a steady rhythm against the tension. Yet her eyes, bright and piercing, betrayed the intensity of her thoughts, piecing together the final threads of a puzzle that had grown ever more intricate. "Jane," Dolly said, her voice strained. "Josie's confession about the sleeping powder, the jewelry in Mark's room, the car at the quarry, it's all pointing somewhere, but I can't see the end. Are we any closer?" Her fingers twisted a handkerchief, a gesture of fraying nerves. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze lifting to meet Dolly's. "We are very close, my dear. The killer has played a clever game, using your library as a distraction and Pamela's death as a mask. But every game has an end, and we are at the board's edge." Her voice was soft but resolute, carrying the certainty of a woman who had unraveled many a village secret. "Today, we return to the majestic. The truth is there, and someone is about to break." The telephone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the room. Dolly answered, her face tightening as Inspector Slack's voice came through, brisk and urgent. "Mrs. Bantry, we've got new evidence. A witness, a cleaner at the Majestic, saw Mark Gaskell near the hotel's service entrance around midnight the night Ruby died. And we found a petrol can in his car, matches the type used in the quarry fire. He's at the station now, and Josie Turner's not far behind. Thought you and Miss Marple should know." He paused, his tone grudging. "Your rumor about an arrest stirred things up. It's got them all rattled." Dolly relayed the message, her eyes wide. "Jane? Mark near the service entrance? And a petrol can? It's him, isn't it?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her needles resuming their rhythm. "A piece, Dolly, but not the whole. Mark's presence at the service entrance is damning, but the jewelry in his room feels staged, like a prop in a play. Josie's powder explains Ruby's vulnerability, but Pamela's death, that's the key. We must confront them both, and quickly." She rose, adjusting her hat with a briskness that belied her age. "To Danemouth, Dolly. The final act is upon us." The drive to the Majestic Hotel was quiet, the sea's gray expanse shimmering under a sky that promised rain. The hotel's grandeur felt tarnished, its lobby subdued, the usual chatter of guests replaced by whispers of scandal. Mr. Prescott, the manager, greeted them with a weary nod, his hands fidgeting with a stack of papers. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, the police have taken Mr. Gaskell to the station, and Miss Turner's been questioned again. Mr. Jefferson's locked himself in his suite, and Mrs. Jefferson's in the lounge, barely speaking. The whole place is on edge." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her face remained serene. "On edge is precisely where we want them, Mr. Prescott. May we see Mrs. Jefferson first? A quiet word might be revealing." Prescott nodded, leading them to the lounge where Adelaide Jefferson sat alone, a cup of tea untouched before her. Her face was pale, her posture rigid, as if she were bracing for a storm. "Mrs. Jefferson," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "The police are making progress. Mr. Gaskell's in custody, and Miss Turner's under scrutiny. Did you ever suspect either of them might have wished Ruby harm?" Adelaide's hands tightened on her cup, her eyes flickering with something, fear, perhaps, or guilt. I didn't know Ruby well," she said, her voice low. "She was Mr. Jefferson's favorite, always around him. Mark found her tiresome, I think, but I never thought—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, her fingers trembling. Dolly, emboldened by Miss Marple's calm, leaned forward. "Adelaide, you were in your room that night, reading. Did you hear anything? Footsteps, voices, anything at all?" Adelaide's eyes met Dolly's briefly, then dropped. "Nothing out of the ordinary. The hotel's always noisy. Music from the ballroom, guests in the halls. I went to bed early." Her words were measured, but Miss Marple noted the strain in her voice, the way her hands twisted the edge of her napkin, like a village girl caught in a lie. Before they could press further, a commotion in the lobby drew their attention. Inspector Slack strode in, his face grim, followed by 2 officers. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, we're taking Josie Turner to the station. She's admitted to giving Ruby the powder, but she's claiming it was an accident. Gaskell's singing a different tune. Says Josie was jealous of Ruby's place with Jefferson." He turned to the room, his voice carrying. "Anyone else with information? Now's the time." The lounge buzzed with whispers, and Miss Marple watched closely, noting Adelaide's sudden stillness, the way her hands froze on her napkin. "Dolly," she murmured, "we must follow them to the station. The truth is close, and it's about to spill." At the Danemouth police station, a squat brick building with a no-nonsense air, Mark Gaskell sat in a stark room, his usual charm replaced by a haggard defiance. Across from him, Josie Turner sat rigid, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. Inspector Slack stood between them, his notebook open, his voice sharp. "Gaskell, you were seen at the service entrance at midnight. Your car's linked to the quarry fire, and those jewels in your room, rubies. Explain yourself." Mark's hands clenched, his voice rising. "I told you, the jewels were planted. I was at the casino. Yes, I stepped out for air, but I didn't see Ruby. I didn't kill her." He turned to Josie, his eyes narrowing. "She's the one who gave Ruby the powder. Ask her why." Josie's head snapped up, her voice sharp. "Don't you dare, Mark. I gave Ruby the powder to help her sleep. She was my cousin. I didn't know it would... Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Miss Marple, standing quietly at the back of the room with Dolly, watched the exchange with keen interest. "Inspector," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "may I ask Miss Turner a question?" Slack, surprised, nodded grudgingly. "Go ahead, Miss Marple." Miss Marple stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Josie. "Miss Turner, you loved Ruby, but you also envied her, didn't you? Her dreams, her place with Mr. Jefferson, the fortune he planned to give her. Did you share your feelings with anyone? Perhaps Mr. Gaskell?" Josie's head jerked up, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't envy her. I brought her here, gave her a chance." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple pressed gently, her tone almost maternal. "But you spoke to someone about the powder, didn't you? Someone who saw an opportunity to remove Ruby and Pamela, to cover their tracks." Her eyes flicked to Mark, who stiffened, his face paling. Josie's composure shattered, her voice a whisper. I told Mark. He was angry about Ruby, said she was taking everything from us. I didn't think I didn't know." She broke off, sobbing, and Mark lunged to his feet, his voice a snarl. "She's lying. I didn't touch Ruby. Yes, I knew about the powder. Josie was always complaining about Ruby, how she was stealing Conway's money. But I didn't kill her." His eyes darted to the door as if seeking escape, and Miss Marple's gaze sharpened, catching the desperation in his posture. Inspector Slack stepped forward, his voice cold. "You're both coming with us. We've got enough to hold you. Jewelry, petrol can, witness statements. We'll sort out who did what." He signaled to his officers, who moved to restrain Mark and Josie, both protesting loudly. Dolly, stunned, whispered to Miss Marple, "Jane, they're turning on each other. Is this it? Are they the killers?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her voice calm. "They're part of it, Dolly, but the picture is complete now. Mark and Josie, lovers bound by greed, planned Ruby's death to secure Conway's fortune. They drugged her with Josie's powder, strangled her, and moved her body to your library to cast suspicion on you and the Colonel. Pamela was killed because she resembled Ruby, a decoy to confuse the timeline. Her body burned to hide the truth, but the bracelet left to ensure her identification." Her eyes gleamed, the puzzle falling into place. It was a partnership, but partnerships break under pressure. Back at the Majestic, they found Conway Jefferson in his suite, his face etched with grief and betrayal. Adelaide sat beside him, her hand on his, her eyes red but resolute. "Is it true?" Conway asked, his voice hoarse. "Mark and Josie?" Miss Marple nodded, her tone gentle. "I'm afraid so, Mr. Jefferson. They saw Ruby as a threat to their future, and they acted to protect it. Pamela was an innocent, caught in their scheme to mislead." She paused, her eyes softening. "I'm sorry for your loss." Conway's shoulders slumped, his voice breaking. "I loved Ruby like a daughter. I thought I could give her a future. Now, I'll make sure her memory lives on. A trust, perhaps, for young dancers like her." His eyes filled with tears, and Adelaide squeezed his hand, her face a mixture of sorrow and relief. As they left the suite, Dolly turned to Miss Marple, her voice low. "Jane, you did it. You saw what no one else could." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her needles clicking as they walked through the lobby. "I only saw what was there, Dolly. People are predictable in their greed, their fear, their love. Like a village scandal, it's all in the patterns." Her thoughts drifted to Saint. Mary Mead, to a time when a young couple's scheme had unraveled under scrutiny, their guilt revealed by a single careless act. The truth always comes out, if you watch closely enough. Back at Gossington Hall that evening, the fire crackled in the drawing room, casting a warm glow over the room. Colonel Bantry, no longer pacing, sat with a glass of brandy, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Well, Jane, you've saved us. The village will talk for years, but at least it's over." He raised his glass. "To your sharp eyes." Dolly, pouring sherry, smiled wearily. "Jane, I don't know how you did it. Mark and Josie, I never would have guessed." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her voice calm. "It was there, Dolly, in the details, the powder, the jewelry, the timing. They thought they could outwit us, but the truth is stubborn." She leaned back, her eyes gleaming. "Now, let's hope your library can be a place of peace again." As the firelight danced, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village, to the quiet rhythms of life that would soon resume. The case was closed, but she knew, with the certainty of a knitter finishing a pattern, that other puzzles would come, and she would be ready. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The golden light of late summer bathed St. Mary Mead in a deceptive calm, as if the village could shrug off the shadow of the recent tragedies that had gripped Gossington Hall. Inside the drawing room, Dolly Bantry sat by the window, her hands still, her eyes fixed on the garden where roses nodded in the breeze. The resolution of Ruby Keene's murder in their library and Pamela Reeves's death in the quarry had lifted a weight, but the scars remained, like a faint stain on the hearthrug where Ruby's body had lain. Across from her, Miss Jane Marple knitted with her customary serenity, the soft click of her needles, a gentle rhythm in the quiet room. Yet her eyes, sharp and unyielding, betrayed the mind still sifting through the echoes of the case. "Jane," Dolly said, her voice soft but tinged with lingering unease. "It's over, isn't it? Mark and Josie in custody, their scheme exposed. But I can't shake the feeling that we've missed something. Why our library of all places? And poor Pamela, what did she do to deserve that?" Her fingers toyed with the edge of a cushion, a nervous gesture that spoke of restless thoughts. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze lifting to meet Dolly's. "It's over, my dear, in the sense that the guilty are caught. But mysteries, like old wounds, leave questions that linger. Your library was chosen to distract, to cast suspicion or delay discovery. As for Pamela, she was a tragic pawn, chosen for her resemblance to Ruby, to muddle the truth." Her voice was calm but carried a weight of certainty, honed by years of observing human nature's darker corners. "Today, we must tie up the loose ends. There are still those who know more than they've said." Dolly's eyes widened, a spark of curiosity reigniting. "More? Jane, you think there's someone else involved?" "Not involved, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their rhythm, "but complicit in silence. Someone saw something, perhaps unwittingly, and has kept it to themselves. We must return to Danemouth, to the Majestic, and speak to those who were closest to the drama." She rose, adjusting her hat with a briskness that belied her age. "Come, Dolly, the final threads await." The telephone rang before they could leave, its sharp tone cutting through the room. Dolly answered, her face tightening as Inspector Slack's voice came through. Gruff but less impatient than usual. "Mrs. Bantry, Gaskell and Turner are talking, pointing fingers at each other. Gaskell claims Josie planned it all, says she was obsessed with keeping her place at the Majestic. Josie swears Gaskell used her, manipulated her into giving Ruby the powder. We're sorting through it, but there's one thing odd. Adelaide Jefferson's been asking to see you and Miss Marple. She's at the hotel, says it's urgent." He paused, his tone grudging. "You've got a knack for this, so I'm passing it along." Dolly relayed the message, her brow furrowing. "Adelaide? Why would she want us now? Do you think she knows something?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her face remained serene. "I suspect she knows more than she's let on, Dolly. Her silence has been noticeable. Let's go to her. The truth often hides in the quiet ones." She gathered her knitting bag, her movements purposeful, and they set out for Danemouth. The Majestic Hotel, once a beacon of elegance, seemed diminished under the weight of scandal. The lobby was nearly empty, the usual hum of holidaymakers replaced by a hushed unease, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Mr. Prescott, the manager, greeted them with a weary nod, his hands fidgeting with a pen. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, Mrs. Jefferson's in the private parlor. She's been waiting for you. The police have been in and out, and Mr. Jefferson's taken to his room, says he can't bear the talk." His voice was low, his eyes darting toward the parlor door. The private parlor was a small, elegant room, its walls lined with faded silk and its windows overlooking the sea. Adelaide Jefferson sat on a velvet sofa, her hands clasped tightly, her face pale but composed. When she saw Dolly and Miss Marple, she rose, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice low. I couldn't stay silent any longer, not after Mark and Josie." Miss Marple sat opposite her, her knitting bag at her feet, her expression gentle but probing. "Mrs. Jefferson, you have something to tell us, something you've held back, perhaps out of loyalty or fear?" Adelaide's hands trembled, but she nodded. "I saw something that night, the night Ruby died. I didn't tell the police because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to believe it." Her voice faltered, and she looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. "I was in my room, as I said, but I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I went to the balcony for air. I saw Mark and Josie near the service entrance. They were arguing, their voices low but angry. I couldn't hear much, but I heard Ruby's name and something about getting rid of her. I thought it was just a quarrel, but now—" Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Dolly, stunned, leaned forward. "Adelaide, why didn't you say anything? You could have stopped this." Adelaide's head lifted, her eyes red. "I didn't know what it meant. Mark's my brother-in-law, and Josie. She was Ruby's cousin. I thought it was just talk, jealousy over Mr. Jefferson's affection. I didn't want to cause trouble for Conway. He's been through so much." Her voice was pleading, and Miss Marple noted the sincerity in it, tinged with guilt. Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but firm. "Mrs. Jefferson, did you see anyone else that night? A man, perhaps, in a dark coat, near the terrace?" Adelaide frowned, thinking. "No, not that I recall. But there was something else. When I went back inside, I saw a light in Ruby's room, flickering like a candle. I thought it was odd, since she was supposed to be asleep. I didn't check, though. I wish I had." Her voice trembled, and she looked away, her hands clenching. Dolly turned to Miss Marple, her eyes wide. "Jane, a light in Ruby's room. That could be the killer." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind racing. "Indeed, Dolly. A light suggests someone was there, someone who knew Ruby was drugged and vulnerable. It's a thread we must follow." She turned back to Adelaide. "Thank you, Mrs. Jefferson. You've been brave to speak. One last question. Did you ever hear Mark or Josie mention Pamela Reeves?" Adelaide shook her head, her face puzzled. "No, never. I didn't know her. Ruby never spoke of her either." Her voice was steady now, as if unburdening herself had lifted a weight. As they left the parlor, Dolly whispered, "Jane, Adelaide's story ties Mark and Josie to the service entrance and that light in Ruby's room. It's a clue, isn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gleaming. "A vital clue, Dolly. The light suggests someone entered Ruby's room after Josie left her. Mark and Josie planned her death, but someone else may have acted or watched." Her thoughts drifted to a village scandal years ago, when a maid's silence about a stolen brooch had protected a thief, only to unravel under gentle pressure. "We must speak to the hotel staff again. Someone saw that light, or who lit it." They found Mr. Prescott in his office, his face drawn with the strain of the past days. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, the police are questioning the staff again. It's chaos. Half the guests have checked out." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You've been talking to Mrs. Jefferson. Did she say anything useful? Miss Marple's tone was mild, but her gaze was sharp. She's been helpful, Mr. Prescott. Tell me, did any of your staff report seeing a light in Ruby Keene's room that night, around midnight or later? Prescott frowned, flipping through a ledger. A light? Let me think. Yes, one of the maids, Clara, mentioned something. She was cleaning the corridor around 1 o'clock and saw a flicker in Ruby's room, like a candle or a torch. She thought Ruby was awake, so she didn't disturb her. He looked up, his face paling. You think it's important? Very, Miss Marple said, her voice calm. May we speak to Clara? Clara, a young maid with nervous eyes, was summoned to the office. Her hands twisted her apron as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think it mattered, miss. I saw the light, yes, in Miss Keene's room. It was faint, like someone was moving about with a torch. I heard a door close softly, too, toward the service stairs. I thought it was just a guest, so I didn't say anything. Her eyes filled with tears. If I'd known... Dolly reached out, her voice gentle. You couldn't have known, Clara. But this helps. Did you see who came out of the room? Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. No, miss. It was dark, and I was at the other end of the corridor. I just heard the door and saw the light go out. She paused, her brow furrowing. But I did find something the next morning, near the service stairs. A button like from a man's coat. I gave it to Mr. Prescott. Prescott's eyes widened, and he rummaged through a drawer, producing a small brass button, slightly tarnished. I forgot about this, he admitted. Thought it was nothing, just a lost trinket. He handed it to Miss Marple, who examined it closely, her fingers tracing its edge. A button, she murmured, her eyes gleaming. From a dark coat, perhaps? Her thoughts raced, piecing together the fragments. Josie's powder, Mark's presence at the service entrance, Adelaide's sighting, the light in Ruby's room, and now this button. Mr. Prescott, may we see Mr. Jefferson? One last conversation may tie this together. In Conway Jefferson's suite, the air was heavy with grief. Conway sat by the window, his wheelchair angled toward the sea, his face etched with exhaustion and betrayal. Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, he said, his voice hoarse. I hear Mark and Josie are confessing, blaming each other. I can't believe I trusted them. His hands clenched, his eyes red with unshed tears. Miss Marple sat opposite him, her knitting bag at her feet. Mr. Jefferson, you loved Ruby, and that love blinded you to their motives, greed, fear of losing your fortune. But there's one detail left. A button found near the service stairs from a man's coat. Did you ever see Mark wear a dark coat with brass buttons? Conway frowned, thinking. Mark? No, he's all flash, silk suits, bright ties. But... He paused, his face paling. There was a man, a guest Ruby mentioned. Her mystery man, she called him. I saw him once, in the lounge, wearing a dark coat with buttons like that. I thought he was just an admirer, but... Now? His voice trailed off, and Miss Marple's mind seized the detail, the final piece clicking into place. Back at Gossington Hall that evening, the fire crackled in the drawing room as Dolly poured sherry, her hands steadier now. Colonel Bantry, no longer pacing, sat with a newspaper, his face a mixture of relief and lingering shock. Jane, you've done it again, he said, raising his glass. Mark and Josie caught, and now this button business. Is it really over? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her voice calm. It's over, Colonel, but for one last thread. The man in the dark coat was no phantom. He was real, and he acted with Mark and Josie, perhaps as their tool or their master. The button ties him to Ruby's room, to the moment of her death. She leaned back, her eyes gleaming. Tomorrow, we'll give it to Slack. He'll find the man, and the case will close. Dolly, sipping her sherry, smiled wearily. Jane, you're a marvel. Our library's ours again, and St. Mary Mead can breathe. But that man, who is he? Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her thoughts drifting to a village scandal years ago, when a stranger's quiet presence had masked a thief's intent, revealed by a single overlooked clue. He's someone who thought he could hide in the shadows, Dolly, but shadows betray, if you know where to look. She resumed her knitting, the click of her needles, a promise that the truth, once found, would hold.